Attack on America, getting tough. President Bush, an emotional warning.
I'm a loving guy. And I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do. And I intend to do it.
The war on terrorism, the focus of his administration. Tonight, NBC's task force uncovers new information on the hijackers, who they were, the size of their deadly web, and how they were trained. Also, with the number of missing Americans growing, heroic rescues today at Ground Zero, and glimmers of hope and glory.
Attack on America. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Tonight, President Bush has put the world on notice. The war on terrorism will be the focus of his administration, and it is just getting underway. Vice President Cheney has been dispatched to Camp David so the president and vice president are not a common target for additional terrorist attacks. This on a day when federal law enforcement officials say they have now identified all 18 hijackers, but they're still tracking down a network of associates. Tomorrow will be a national day of mourning, and there is so much to mourn. The Capitol was evacuated tonight because of a bomb threat, but there's now an all clear. But shortly after that, flights in and out of New York's three main airports were suspended because of FBI activity. We'll have an update on that momentarily. You're looking live now at the scene in Lower Manhattan, a perilous day today, as several buildings near the site of the Twin Towers, some of them 50 stories or more, are unstable and in danger of falling, only adding to the chaos there. And the wreckage already on the ground is shifting, making things even more difficult and dangerous for rescuers. This afternoon, 2 firefighters were trapped under falling wreckage. They were pulled out alive and relatively unhurt. Tonight, New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani gave us the first estimate of the dead and missing. 94 known dead, but 4,763 still unaccounted for. Now to the top stories at this hour. We're covering all the bases, and we begin with some breaking news tonight. NBC's aviation expert Robert Hager joins me from Washington. You also saw Campbell Brown and David Bloom of NBC News. We'll be getting to them momentarily. Robert, let's begin with this incident at Kennedy Airport. What do we know about it?
Well, what we know is that the FAA has grounded all planes scheduled to take off from any of the 3 New York airports, and it's holding on the ground planes that haven't left yet from any other airports around the country that are bound into New York. The only planes that can land there are ones that are already in the air. All this because of, as you say, FBI activity, and what it is that they moved in and arrested 4 men as they were boarding a flight from Kennedy Airport. Apparently, these men were on the FBI's watch list, and there is one report that they carried pilot's licenses and had some forged documents. So 4 men have been arrested, and that's about all we know at this point about what's happening there. There's been another development in the investigation. Investigators in Pittsburgh, not in Pittsburgh, but southeast of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, where the 4th of those hijacked planes went in, have now found a black box, but it's the flight data recorder. So that simply tells how the plane performed in flight. Doesn't give you the sound from the cockpit, so it's not as good a find as the cockpit voice recorder will or could be. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. Now let's go to Lower Manhattan, and NBC's David Bloom joins me there with the situation tonight. David?
Well, Tom, tonight the greatest hopes and the worst fears of these rescuers are coming true. They are pulling people from the rubble alive, at least 3 that we know of for sure, perhaps more. But by initial accounts, they're firefighters trapped today as this rescue operation, already so dangerous, takes a frightening turn. Amid the rubble today, life.
He's alive. He's alive.
Rescue workers erupt in cheers as at least 3 firefighters are pulled from the ruins of the World Trade Center. According to eyewitness accounts, these 3 men were not buried on Tuesday. They were trapped today as debris shifted and other nearby buildings collapsed. Firefighter Glenn Ray reached down to touch what he thought was a lifeless hand.
He was alive.
There was a man alive, yes.
Did you squeeze your hand back? I mean,
he scratched my top of my knuckle.
Okay.
Tonight, even more harrowing news. What's left of the World Trade Center's South Tower may be about to collapse. but someone, a woman rescuers believe, is tapping for help. Even though the south side of the South Tower might be about to collapse.
Right, someone's tapping from below. Survivor.
And you guys are staying.
A lot of guys stay, yes.
It is a gut-wrenching day in New York City. Bomb scares forcing evacuations at the railroad station, historic Grand Central, and at LaGuardia airports. Search dogs scour the rubble. Long lines of emergency workers pass buckets of debris, even as surveyors watch to see which buildings are buckling, swaying, about to collapse. It's nerve-rattling, especially for volunteers like Brooklyn medic Rona Chambers.
I don't know what came down. I don't know what that was all about. Everybody just ran. People were just like, you know, running over each other to get out. So that's all I know. I wish I knew more.
And you're not going back?
No, well, I've been there since the second plane hit, so that's 3 days and I'm done.
But firefighter John Marabito vows to stay.
The shock that overcame me in the initial blast, I was in the building, and the shock that overcame me sent me home, and I needed to rest. And then I had to come back here and help find my brothers and help find people that are missing and do my job.
Loved ones search in vain for the missing. Paul DiMartini passing out a picture of his brother Frank.
It's my only hope. I mean, obviously people might look at it as futile, but what else? They won't let me dig, and I can't blame them for that, but what else can I do?
And yet the rescue workers, dazed, covered in soot, stay. American flags flying, hopes soaring, however briefly, when, as today, 3 men stand up and walk out of the rubble alive. Again, as best we can ascertain at this hour, those 3 men, firefighters, were trapped today, not in Tuesday's attacks. I should add, Todd, that the Secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency, Christine Todd Whitman, is here at this hour. She says they've been taking environmental quality, air quality readings, and that while there are some troubling readings in terms of asbestos, they believe that the air quality is safe enough for the rescue operation to continue. Tom.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom in Lower Manhattan tonight. Now let's go to the White House, where, as you might expect, there's a lot going on today. President George W. Bush, very visible. He's coming to New York City tomorrow. Tomorrow he has declared to be a National Day of Remembrance. NBC's Campbell Brown joins me now once again. Campbell.
Tom, the president could not hide his emotion today. We heard from him the strongest language he has used since these attacks, calling this the war of the 21st century and fighting the war the focus of his administration.
Give us a sense as to
in the Oval Office, tears welling up in his eyes. The president today fully aware history will remember him by how he leads the country through this crisis.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do.
The president vows to, quote, whip terrorism, rallying the world to join the U.S. in this fight.
But now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory.
The gravity of the battle clearly weighing on the president as he and wife Laura visit a Washington hospital to spend time with the victims of the Pentagon attack to hear their horrifying stories.
They talked about escaping, going through fire, and crawling through debris.
At the White House, the president is in and out of meetings with lawmakers, key aides, and his national security team, continuing to reach out to leaders around the world, seeking military and economic support, assembling an international coalition to go to war. But in public, the president is focused on the immediate need here at home. On a conference call with New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and Governor George Pataki, Bush says he will go to New York tomorrow to see for himself the destruction of the Twin Towers, to personally thank the men and women searching around the clock for the missing.
Well, I can't tell you how proud I am of the good citizens of your part of the world.
With Bush front and center, White House officials today revealed new information about what they say was a threat to Air Force One. One key aide says some advisors did question the wisdom of keeping the president moving between 2 Air Force bases far from Washington after the attacks, until they were told an anonymous caller phoned the Secret Service and warned, quote, Air Force One is next. The official says the caller knew code words relating to Air Force One's procedures and whereabouts. Today, the president defends his decision to stay away.
I know I took the appropriate actions as the commander-in-chief to handle the crisis.
The situation remains tense here tonight. Vice President Cheney has left the White House for Camp David. His spokeswoman calling it a precautionary measure. The president and national security team expected to join him there this weekend. And the Secret Service has extended the security perimeter around the White House. Pennsylvania Avenue has been closed to pedestrian traffic, and officials say it could stay that way for some time. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. Within NBC News, we've organized a terrorism task force of our best investigative reporters to get the latest on the investigation. In its massive coast-to-coast effort tonight, the FBI now believes that it has identified everyone involved in planning and carrying out the hijackings and the attacks, 18 in all. We're covering this story on many fronts tonight. NBC's Justice Department, Pete Williams, will start us off. We'll be getting to Kerry Sanders in Florida in a moment. Pete?
Tom, it's an investigation on two critical fronts, identifying who carried out the attack and how, and who helped them, associates of the terrorists, some of whom could still be at large, posing a danger of further attacks. New details tonight about how the hijackers spread out to take over the 4 planes that crashed Tuesday. 5 each, the FBI says, on the 2 planes that left Boston and flew into the World Trade Center towers, and 4 on each of the other 2, the one from Washington Dulles that crashed into the Pentagon, and the plane that left Newark and crash-landed in Pennsylvania. 18 hijackers in all. Tonight, the Justice Department plans to release the names of all 18, along with pictures of those for which the FBI can find confirmed photographs. Federal officials tell NBC News they now believe the suicide flights were at least 2 years in the planning. A picture emerging as tips come flooding in.
The FBI's Leads hotline has received 2,055 phone calls. Some of these leads have been helpful to the investigation. The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips.
Federal agents are now investigating whether some of the hijackers got jet training at this flight school in Minneapolis. Government officials tell NBC News that just last month, a man of Middle Eastern descent was detained there on immigration charges after instructors at the school became suspicious when the man offered a large sum of cash in return for training in the school's jet flight simulator. Agents also rushed to a flight school in western Michigan to see whether any of the hijackers might have trained there. In Boston, investigators find an airport employee tarmac pass in that car driven by 2 of the suspected hijackers, generating new questions for the FBI about whether the hijackers had any inside help. The FBI's new director says finding associates of the hijackers is a top priority for federal agents.
They are, where necessary, obtaining search warrants, obtaining grand jury subpoenas, and whatever is necessary to obtain the evidence to more particularly identify the particular hijackers and anyone associated with them.
A sign today that the investigation is truly worldwide, as German authorities, acting on a tip from the FBI, detain an American at the Hamburg airport for questioning. U.S. officials tell NBC News the man, originally from Yemen, carried an airline ticket for destinations in cities throughout Europe. A senior official tells NBC News that authorities cannot be certain they've uncovered the full extent of the terrorist plans. They do say, however, they know of no other planned attacks, either for Tuesday or to be carried out later. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams tonight. We do have more details tonight on how those 2 pilots who got their flight training in South Florida and are suspected of being 2 of the hijackers on the Boston flights, how they conducted their lives. NBC's Kerry Sanders has been working that part of the investigation. He's in Miami tonight. Kerry?
Well, Tom, NBC News has obtained a copy of the visa of one of the suspected suicide bombers. The visa for Mohammed Atta shows that he entered this country as a tourist. Now, under immigration regulations, he should have never been given that visa because of his suspected involvement in a terrorist bombing in Israel in 1986.
23-year-old Marwan al-Shahi, one of the suspected suicide pilots, hiding in plain view on Florida's Gulf Coast for more than 7 months, living with 33-year-old Mohammed Atta, another suspected suicide pilot. After both earned their commercial flight ratings on this twin-engine plane, NBC News has learned they came to Miami, paying $1,500 in cash to sit at the controls of a Boeing 727 flight simulator, similar to this one. Henry George, the instructor, telling the FBI The duo spent about 6 hours at the controls.
I feel violated, raped, whatever. Here I have a skill that I'm very proud of, that I think we're good at passing on to other pilots wanting to become competent pilots. And here we provided that kind of expertise to the lowest of mankind.
FBI agents also looking at a Microsoft Flight Simulator program available at any software store. The program includes a path through Lower Manhattan by the World Trade Center towers. Flown off course, an eerie picture. The simulated 757 flies directly into Trade Tower number 1. Veteran commercial airline pilot Alex Garmendia using the program for the first time today. He says after hours on this software, a novice pilot without experience in a jet would still lack the skills to do much of the controls.
But it surely shows you the cockpit layout.
In FBI custody tonight, Anand Bukhari, a material witness reportedly cooperating with investigators. His Vero Beach home raided by agents. His brother dying in a mid-air collision in Florida while learning to fly here. That accident 1 year ago to the day of the hijackings. The FBI's leads in Florida growing exponentially. FBI agents visiting a strip club in Daytona Beach. Just hours before the hijackings, 3 Middle Eastern men there hinted at the violence to come.
One of the gentlemen actually making the statement, well, America's going to see blood and wait till tomorrow.
Now tonight the FBI has dispatched agents to Hamburg, Germany, to an apartment that German authorities went into yesterday. That's a home where both Atta and al-Shahi, the 2 suspected suicide bombers who were here in Florida, once lived. And according to German authorities, that apartment is a known safe haven, a known safe house for agents of Osama bin Laden. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Kerry Sanders. And joining me now is the man who has overall responsibility for this investigation, the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, our Chief Law Enforcement Officer. General Ashcroft, welcome. First of all, you have a positive ID on all 18 hijackers, and we were told earlier that you were going to release photographs of them by 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm now told that there has been an indefinite delay. Is there a reason for that delay?
Well, we're working toward providing the information that you mentioned sometime this evening. We want to make sure that we do what we do well, and we think it's appropriate, and it may help us generate additional leads. As you well know, and as your reports have indicated, we're following a great number of leads, some of which have been phoned in, some from the internet, and others from citizens who now recognize in retrospect that they have been associated in one way or another with those responsible for this heinous act of violence.
Speaking of those responsible, earlier today, Secretary of State Colin Powell made it quite clear that he believes that Osama bin Laden is the man who's the mastermind behind all of this. Based on what you know of these 18 hijackers, is that your conclusion as well?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this was the act of a very sophisticated organization, the capacity to coordinate this kind of effort, the capacity to sustain it over the course of several years, including training and the like, that I think that would probably take. I'm not saying we know about that kind of duration in the project, but it might take that long to plan it. So it's my judgment that that's the scale of operation that could support such an attack.
But you do not yet have the hard evidence that will take it directly back to Osama bin Laden?
I'm not in a position to comment on the nature of the evidence we have. We continue to follow these leads aggressively. Where it's important to get warrants, we're getting those. Where it's important to detain individuals or otherwise restrain individuals, we're doing that.
There has been some concern, of course, about these reports that you're still on the trail of any number of associates who could still be at large out there. Tell us about their possible role in this conspiracy.
Well, I think most of us that have looked at this situation believe that there had to be some significant level of ground support and assistance to those who were involved in actually perpetrating this crime and ending their lives in the perpetration of this act of war against humanity. We have developed and are working hundreds of leads related to individuals that might have been associated with the hijackers in terms of the hijacking itself. We know a number of people that have been associated with them in other ways, but finding the evidence and developing the evidence connecting them to these heinous acts is an important object of our endeavor.
But just so the American public can be reassured to some degree, General Ashcroft, you have no hard evidence tonight that these people that you're beginning to track down are in the active process of planning another attack.
We are doing everything we can to track them down, and obviously we don't believe there are other attacks that are imminent, and we have done everything we can to assure airline safety, including the assignment of additional security personnel from the Department of Justice and the Treasury Department. We believe that the airlines, when operating the aircraft, are operating them safely, and America will be back in the skies safely at a regular pace.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney General John Ashcroft, America's Chief Law Enforcement Officer. We wish him all the best, obviously. Now to Ground Zero here in New York, where NBC's Ann Thompson spent the day with one family in their anguish search to find out what happened to their missing loved one. Ann?
Tom, as many as 1,000 family members came here to the Armory to exchange information with police. One of them, a New Jersey woman looking for her husband. His 2 co-workers survived. The question is, did he? His picture pinned close to her heart, Margie Meyer travels 22 miles from Glen Rock, New Jersey to Manhattan, desperately searching for her husband, Dave.
He's always been good. He's always helped anybody who asks him.
With his brother Charlie, today Margie seeks help at the Armory on Lexington, the family's crisis center.
We got numbers, they don't work, you know, it's very frustrating.
Anxious for any news about her husband of 31 years. 57-year-old Dave Meyer works as a bond trader for Cantor Fitzgerald until Tuesday morning on the 105th floor of Tower 1. A father of 3 daughters, just 2 weeks ago, he welcomed his 2nd granddaughter into the world.
I'm so glad my dad saw. Got to hold her. And he would do absolutely anything for us and for my 2 girls.
Heather and her sisters keep vigil in New Jersey as Margie waits a half hour in the hot sun to get into the Armory. With hundreds of other families, she tells a detective everything. The brand of underwear Dave wore, the medicine he took, and that his finger was too thin for his wedding ring. And she looks over lists of victims, but there's no Dave. After 2.5 hours, she decides to try the hospitals, hailing a cab, prepared for anything.
I want to be able to see. I don't care what they look like.
There's no word of Dave at St. Vincent's, so they send her to the new school.
I got tape.
Along the way, Charlie puts up Dave's flyer. One of the thousands of missing, plastered on homemade posters near hospitals and the financial district. Hope for Margie fueled by action and prayer.
Let's pray for him right now. Is that okay?
But still nothing.
When I don't have any other place to go, that's when I'm going home.
Because 8 years ago, Margie waited too.
Dave was in that other bombing at the World Trade Center. He made it home, so thank God he'll make it home. It's a little late, but any time is good. He'll come home.
8 years ago, Dave Meyer helped a woman down 105 flights to safety. Margie prays that on Tuesday, someone did the same for Dave. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's Ann Thompson tonight. This anguish, of course, is not confined to family members. Businesses that operated out of the Twin Towers are also scrambling to locate the missing employees. There was some measure of relief today on that front when the head of Morgan Stanley, the World Trade Center's largest tenant with 3,700 employees, said that less than 40 people who worked in the complex for Morgan Stanley still are missing. Here's NBC's Pat Dawson now on some very large corporations that had to do some very personal business today.
Until Tuesday, the Trade Center was a potent symbol of American commerce. Today, a few miles north of the rubble, one company is trying to put the pieces back together.
Managing the grief and the loss right now is huge, and we will never
look at business the same.
For Pitney Bowes, the first step to putting the company together is putting its people together.
I was sitting at my desk, and I believe it was approximately around 20 minutes to 9, and we heard this loud boom.
Eugene Fine was in a mail facility on the 101st floor. 600 of Pitney's workers were in the towers Tuesday, all but 4 now accounted for. Yet even those who survived have been scarred. The company now has more than 20 grief counselors helping their workers cope with the experience.
I saw people literally, whether they jumped out or whether it was the explosion that forced them out. I saw a few coming down. I grieve for those people.
The attack was devastating to some of America's most prominent companies. The biggest tenant, investment firm Morgan Stanley, filled 25 floors of the South Tower. Insurance giant Marsh USA on the 93rd and 100th floor of the North Tower. Pitney Bowes had hundreds of employees spread throughout the 2 towers, and securities firm Cantor Fitzgerald from the North Tower's 101st to 105th floors. The toll on Cantor Fitzgerald, incredible. None of the 700 people in the office Tuesday morning have been found. Not one. CEO Howard Lutnick survived because he was taking his little girl to school.
I can't say it. 700 of my families. 700. I'm just one, but they're all 700. There's so many of them.
And in the face of this huge emotional toll, the companies also face daunting logistical problems. 12 million square feet of office space has been lost. Their offices just gone. And even the simplest parts of doing business now very complicated. Many companies have no place to get their mail, and for a lot of firms, a more intangible loss.
The intellectual power that we lost, the, assets are gone. It's going to take us a long time.
But as many companies like Pitney Bowes struggle to cope with the practical problems of getting back to work, healing the wounds remains the first order of business. Pat Dawson, NBC News, New York.
Now that we do have the first official estimates of just how many people are either dead or unaccounted for, we can start to get some historical perspective on just how devastating this day was for the country. The total dead or missing across the country Tuesday now stands at 5,155, and of course it could go higher. Compare that to 2 of the most devastating days in this country's history, both during World War II. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, 2,400 died. And on D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, 1,500 Americans killed. This is, in fact, a war, and already the casualties are very, very high. NBC's national correspondent Jim Avila is covering the terrible toll of these attacks. We learned much more about each individual among the 1,000 missing in his report tonight. Jim?
Tom, it's clear that the city expects many more dead to be found. In fact, right now, the death toll is just about 100. But behind this building, the morgue in the city of New York, sits one refrigerator truck after another. What are they doing? They're waiting for some of the missing. 30 miles from World Trade Center rubble, Summit, New Jersey keeps track of its missing brokers and office workers by watching untouched cars at the town train station, marking each day the owner does not return with chalk on the tire.
2 days later, the car is still there. 3 days later, the car is still there. They chalk. Now what we do is we take a look at the license plate, okay? Now we find out who owns the car. Where is that person?
Candles burn on Lucy and Ian Thompson's windowsill. Lucy put them there, a symbol of hope that Ian will return to Summit soon. He called from his job as a money broker on the 84th floor after the first jet hit the Twin Towers, but not since.
Light a candle and say his name and keep it lit, or keep a candle lit, and just don't lose hope that it's been with me all the time. And I keep looking at it and thinking about it and talking to him and saying, hang on in there.
Hope for the hidden victims buried beneath tons of concrete and steel. Thousands missing, many of them dead and buried by the World Trade Center debris. Forensic pathologist Stephen Naraki says some bodies from the rubble may never be positively identified.
Just the massiveness and the enormity of the project that lies ahead for forensic science, for the forensic scientists, makes it very difficult to plan on a complete identification.
Tonight in Manhattan, a mile from rescue efforts, a fireman stands at attention.
the New York Fire Department begins to mourn its own losses. Fire Chaplain Michael Judge, who rushed to the disaster after the first collision and was killed in the collapse.
He's right here on my shoulder right now, and he's going to guide us through this somehow.
In suburban Chicago, the Soper family fights back tears for daughter Marie Ray. Chasing a childhood passion for gymnastics, she quit her lawyer job in D.C. to teach the sport in California. The plane taking her to her dream hijacked and crashed.
I've never been one to worry about those sorts of things because that doesn't happen to you. But this one did.
Mourning at schools in Washington, D.C. today, too. 3 prize students and their teachers awarded trips to California by the National Geographic Society, killed aboard the jet that hit the Pentagon.
It was a joyous occasion. Their families were proud of their children. The teachers were proud of the kids that they were bringing along.
And perhaps most difficult for all those families who are waiting to find out about the missing is that forensic pathologists say that there's so much difficulty and it may take so long that many of those people may never be identified. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC Jim Avila tonight. Now let's go to the huge nationwide transportation crisis in this country. The attack literally brought the country to a standstill. Today, for the first time since Tuesday, a few planes were allowed back in the air. But every kind of transportation has been thrown into confusion. It is clear that air travel will never again be quite the same. NBC's aviation expert, Robert Hager, joins us once again tonight with the latest. Robert?
Tom, skies were declared open late this morning, and this airport here, Washington National, Reagan National, is still ghost-like. Traffic in and out of New York, as we heard earlier, has been stopped because of FBI activity, but around the country, airports are beginning to get back in business as airlines call back people and try to jockey their planes into position.
Among the first to land, this flight. Long-delayed passengers greeted by anxious relatives. On a website that tracks every plane flying in the U.S. This is what it looks like on a normal day. This is what it looked like this morning before skies were opened. And this is what it looked like by late afternoon. And this is what security looked like.
But right now I cannot let any passengers through.
A car searched in Miami. Signs being put up in Chicago. No curbside luggage to be checked. U.S. Marshals, custom agents, and Border Patrol assigned now to patrol airports to beef up a uniformed presence. Mail temporarily banned from being carried on passenger flights. But passengers in long, long lines at ticket counters nonetheless relieved to be starting to move at last. Rick Forberg in Atlanta.
I'll try to get to Manchester, New Hampshire, or Rhode Island, or any place I can.
Keith Ruckel going to Cincinnati.
If it takes another half an hour, so what? It's our safety.
I don't care how long the procedure takes to get through, just as long as I get through and get back home to my family.
There were problems.
Outside, please. Let's go outside. Everybody outside. Everybody outside.
At LaGuardia, a terminal was evacuated briefly because of nervousness over something said by a passenger picking up baggage.
Down the ramp. Down the ramp.
In San Francisco, more problems. An Italian passenger plane inbound from Canada turned away and sent back toward the border. Later was given permission to turn again and land after all. With thousands still stranded, rent-car companies were overbooked. Around some cities, 10 times the usual number of requests for cars. Amtrak carrying twice its usual load.
Stamford, Connecticut, Bridgeport, New Haven.
But an Amtrak train in Utah runs into trouble, hits a freight, 6 are injured. And back at airports tonight, airlines are still scrambling to jockey planes back into position, hoping to begin some first semblance of normal operations by week's end.
Still in the works, a plan to put plainclothes sharpshooters, sky marshals disguised as passengers, on some domestic flights for the first time as a deterrent. There's even talk earlier today of drafting U.S. Army Delta Team people for this, but because of legal problems with that, the plan is now to look elsewhere for those people, but still to use them on domestic flights. Tom?
NBC's Robert Hager tonight at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Now to the stories of courage that involved the passengers on that jetliner that crashed in Pennsylvania. All this could have been much worse, perhaps, if it had reached Washington, D.C. But the heroism of some passengers apparently prevented that. Here's NBC's Bob Fall.
In the aftermath of United Flight 93, the bits, the pieces, there is new information. Passengers not only resisted armed hijackers, They may even have thwarted them from crashing into the White House. Passengers like 6'5" Mark Bingham, who loved to play rugby, business executive Thomas Burnett, an ex-high school quarterback, and 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, athletic, quick-witted, the father of a 3-month-old daughter.
He thought in his mind that, well, we're going to die, but we're not going to let anyone else die from this.
Saraconi learned from Glick's wife the hostage called her on his cell phone, telling her passengers were going to rush 3 Arab-looking men. Even joked about using their plastic knives from breakfast.
Hearing him
Dina
talk.
Burnett heard her husband say terrorists had already stabbed 1 passenger to death and that the others felt they had to do something.
I have no doubt that he had formulated a plan to get the hijackers out of the cockpit and get home. I think that he had every intention of being home that night.
It's unclear just what they did, but it is clear that 57 minutes after the plane took off from Newark, it made an almost 180-degree turn near Cleveland and headed southeast toward Washington, D.C., crashing in Pennsylvania 33 minutes later.
These people, even though they didn't land that plane and they didn't save their own lives, made the ultimate sacrifice and were successful ultimately in what they did.
His best friend says that Glick wouldn't have thought twice about giving up his life to save others.
He was the kind of guy that would have done that. So it's just unbelievable that he did it.
And Dina Burnett will tell her 3 children their father died fighting back.
They know that he's in heaven and that he's with Jesus, and they asked if they could call him on his cell phone.
3 ordinary Americans, happy, successful, doomed, and at the end, heroic. Bob Faw, NBC News, Washington.
Now to the American response to that attack, with the president today called the first war of the 21st century. I'm joined by members of NBC News' Terrorism Task Force. Jim Miklaszewski is at the Pentagon. NBC's Andrea Mitchell covers the State Department and National Security Matters for us, and Fred Francis does the same thing. Jim Miklaszewski, let's begin with you at the Pentagon. Everyone expects some kind of U.S. military action. What is the current thinking? Will it be sustained?
Well, that's exactly right, Tom. Americans do expect some kind of action now. And U.S. government officials tell NBC News that the Bush administration, based on overwhelming evidence, has determined that Osama bin Laden is among those directly responsible for this week's attack on America. The question now, what will the U.S. do about it? Today's determination that bin Laden is the mastermind behind the devastating terrorist attacks means the U.S. will now go after bin Laden with all of America's might. In the kind of rhetoric not heard since the Gulf Wars, Secretary of State Colin Powell put whomever's responsible on notice.
We will go after that group, that network, and those who have harbored, supported, and aided that network to rip the network up.
But the U.S. won't stop there, intent apparently on also going after Afghanistan's ruling party, the Taliban, which provides sanctuary for bin Laden.
It's not just simply a matter of capturing people and holding them accountable, but removing the sanctuaries, removing the support systems, ending states who sponsor terrorism.
U.S. officials tell NBC News while no decisions have been made, all options for military strikes are on the table, including an all-out invasion. Option 1. The quickest response, airstrikes, using cruise missiles and long-range B-52 bombers. The U.S. launched a missile attack in 1998, but the elusive bin Laden escaped unharmed. 2. A sustained campaign of airstrikes launched from aircraft carriers and Allied bases in the region. 3. An airborne assault, infantry paratroopers backed by Apache attack helicopters.
I think one thing is clear is that you don't do it with just a single military strike, no matter how dramatic.
As in the days leading up to the Gulf War, the Bush administration is lining up lots of help. In a historic decision, all NATO nations will permit the U.S. military to launch airstrikes from their bases. In the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar have also opened their bases to American warplanes. Even Russia, with wartime experience in Afghanistan, is offering military and intelligence assistance, as well as Uzbekistan. U.S. airborne troops have conducted military exercises with both Russia and Uzbekistan for several years. But military action is not the only option. In a broad-based assault, the Bush administration will push hard for diplomatic and economic sanctions against any terrorist state. And tonight, Bush officials report that other groups may have been involved in this week's terrorist attacks and may have been supported by Iraq's Saddam Hussein. All are potential targets now in the U.S.'s new war on terrorism, a war that will surely be long and bloody. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky tonight. Now let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell on America's chances. Can the United States win this war against terrorism? Andrea?
Tom, U.S. officials say they can win this war against terrorism, but know that it will be long and costly, that it could even be a multi-year campaign. First to take on, find, and eliminate Osama bin Laden, and then to take on the entire global terror network. Out of the ashes of disaster, a U.S. determination to wage a crusade against terror on every front. But the enemy is elusive, mysterious, and dedicated, leading the dispossessed of the Islamic world in a holy war against the United States, with 21st century technology and medieval ferocity.
You're dealing with a very, very skilled, knowledgeable, thinking enemy, and we just have to think better than them, think faster than them, and be cleverer than them.
It's a hatred rooted in Osama bin Laden's fury after U.S. troops rescued his native Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein. To bin Laden, the American-led coalition and its Western culture defiled the holiest sites in the Muslim world. Further enraged by American support for Israel, U.S. indictments say bin Laden first targeted American troops in Somalia, then Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and now suicide hijackings in the United States.
They're willing to die. They're not only willing to die, they're willing to spend years studying something, knowing that the end result is not to become an airline pilot or to make a lot of money flying people around the world, but to crash into a building.
How does a civilized nation following the rule of law win a fight with fanatics? Today, a former president and past CIA director says we have to fight dirty, without one arm tied behind our backs.
And if you're going to infiltrate some cell somewhere, or a terrorist cell, you have to deal with people that are willing to betray their country, people that are willing to betray their friends, people that want money or other things, and it's not pleasant.
The first challenge, infiltrating a closed society, bin Laden's secret training camps, a tribal culture of family members.
We've got to go after the training camps. We've got to go after and eradicate the very idea of training people for terrorism in the world.
And in a world where bin Laden uses the latest technology to hide his secret commands, how much of a barrier are preventive steps like banning curbside baggage check-in?
They will try to find other areas where we are vulnerable, particularly in such areas as cyber vulnerability, chemical and biological weapons.
The thing about bin Laden is that he takes his time, knows his targets, and never strikes in the same way twice. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell tonight. Now with more on how terrorists function inside the United States in those terrorist cells, I'm joined by NBC's Fred Francis. Fred, what are you hearing about the network of terrorism across this country?
Well, Tom, it's vast, and intelligence officials tell NBC News that by week's end, they expect to know the names of those involved and those who supported the terrorist cells, the planning cells, assigned to this hijacking.
One official said the planning and support cells could include up to 100 people, for the most part, U.S. residents from Islamic nations. The planning cells, usually less than 10 people who normally just raise money for the cause, are today being investigated by the FBI in Boston, Brooklyn, Washington, D.C., Union City, New Jersey, and in Texas, California, Arizona, and Florida.
These people can seem like perfectly ordinary, law-abiding citizens until the call to jihad, holy war, comes.
When that call comes, say law officers, those in the planning cells supply cash, credit cards, cars, driver's licenses, and lodging, and are not told for what purpose, and almost certainly, officials say, do not know attack details. In the final stages before an attack, the operation is often merged or handed off to an execution cell.
Usually the local people aren't aware of what the broader aims, or maybe they may just know a tiny part of the operation, but they're orchestrated by a guiding hand who often leaves the country before the terrorist attack occurs.
That's what happened after the truck bombing of the American embassy in Kenya. A commander there was this man, Harun Fassel, who U.S. court documents show placed 2 telephone calls from this rented villa not far from the embassy to Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan the morning of the bombing. Fasil, still at large, is very much like Ramzi Youssef, the commander convicted in the first World Trade Center bombing. College graduates, multilingual, computer literate, and highly organized. Ramzi Youssef watched from New Jersey while his men attacked the World Trade Center 8 years ago. Terrorism experts are certain there was a commander watching this week's attack as well.
A bin Laden field commander, Tom, who got help from support cells within this country before the attacks, and almost certainly, officials say tonight, help as he's trying to get out of the country. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Fred Francis in Washington tonight. And the Capitol late today, as we have seen another incident on a very jumpy day, a bomb threat at the nation's capital. Alarms were pulled. The Senate and the House sides were evacuated. The all clear came a short time later. This in the midst of a tense and busy day in Washington. After all, there was work to be done in Congress. NBC's Lisa Myers joins us now with a view from Capitol Hill and the very latest. And in a moment, we'll hear from NBC's Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert, as he gets his microphone on and gets himself in place. Let's begin with you, Lisa.
Tom, as you say, everyone is back in the building and back at work. Congress is moving at warp speed to respond to this tragedy, approving special help for victims and rescue workers, and what is now a $40 billion down payment on the war on terrorism and the cost of rebuilding. The one big sticking point tonight is how much power to give the president to conduct this war and to respond to any future acts of terrorism. Late today, congressional leaders toured the wreckage at the Pentagon and vow the president will get whatever he wants.
Now the time for talking is over and it's time for action to start.
But behind closed doors, some Democrats and Republicans balk at what some see as the president's request for sweeping powers. This draft resolution from the White House authorizes use of armed forces against all those who planned, authorized, harbored, committed, or aided in the attacks, and to deter and preempt any future acts of terrorism. Still haunted by memories of giving Lyndon Johnson a blank check in Vietnam, senior senators want to support Bush, but not give him unchecked new powers.
We're prepared to respond. What we want to do is try to nail down how we best do that.
Senator John McCain argues that at a minimum, what's needed is a resolution similar to that in the Persian Gulf War, authorizing the president to use whatever force he needs, including ground troops if necessary.
It should say that the president is entitled or is authorized to use force against those who have acted against the United States and those he perceives to intend to act against the United States of America.
What about an actual declaration of war? The country has done it only 5 times, always against other countries. The last time, World War II.
Who do you declare war on? Terrorism? Afghanistan? Taliban?
Today, Congress also is moving to deal with the staggering cost of this. The House unanimously voting to give victims of this tragedy the same tax breaks as soldiers killed in combat, and to speed benefits for rescue workers, calling them all heroes of war.
I would say at this time, let's commit ourselves to those men who gave their lives.
Congress is working very hard, Tom, to keep any disagreements behind closed doors. They hope to emerge tomorrow united on a strong resolution empowering the president to respond with whatever force he deems necessary. Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's Lisa Myers tonight. Now let's go to Washington Bureau Chief Tim Russert. NBC News has been doing some polling this week, Tim, and this country is solidly united behind President Bush.
Tom, it is overwhelming. Look at this first question. Was the attack on Tuesday worse than Pearl Harbor? Unbelievable results. By a margin of 66%, people believe it was more serious. 25% said equal. 91% of the American people believe this is the equal to or worse than Pearl Harbor. And what about the president's support? How's he doing? Overwhelming support for George W. Bush amongst the American people. 80% approve of his performance thus far. Scant 8% disapprove. And the question that's relevant to Lisa Myers' piece just before us, Tom, will the American people support military action even if it means a long war? 83% say yes, 8% say no. This country is angry, it is resolved, and it wants action, Tom.
Tim, tonight we have the exceptional measure of the Vice President of the United States being dispatched to Camp David, Maryland, President Bush, the commander-in-chief, will remain at the White House because they don't want to present any additional attackers with a common presidential, vice presidential profile. Is that going to continue for some time?
Yeah, Tom, it will, and they also extended the boundaries of security for the White House, as Campbell Brown reported. However, the entire cabinet, the president and the vice president, will be meeting at Camp David this weekend as part of a strategy group, a task force, if you will. They are taking this very, very seriously. As the president said this morning, this is the new focus of his administration. This is the first war of the 21st century. They are wasting no time in putting plans in place, organizing their coalition, and trying to get some results by finding these terrorists.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Tim Russer tonight. Of course, a poll can't measure everything. To get a slightly different angle on the country's reaction today, we turn to NBC's Roger O'Neill, who is reporting tonight from Denver. Roger?
Tom, the change in America has been profound. Just working in a high-rise office building, for example, some people unable to get on elevators, others unable to come to work, having nightmares, terrible dreams about jets slamming into their offices.
Ann Boyle still marvels at the view from the 48th floor of Denver's tallest skyscraper, but admits the next time she sees a commercial jet fly by, her heart's going to beat faster.
After this has happened, I think everybody will stop for a second and...
You're a little bit on edge.
Absolutely. We want to see them far away.
While office workers admit to feeling vulnerable, there's outright fear in Arab communities. Another mosque in Washington was attacked today. In Detroit, an Arab American newspaper is getting hundreds of hate calls.
I hope every Arabic-born son of a dies. Slimy piece of race.
In suburban Chicago, police broke up an angry mob of 300 outside a mosque. Today, 14-year-old Aliyah Suleiman hides behind closed curtains and locked doors. She saw those ugly Americans.
I was scared they were going to hit me with the flagpole, beat me with my own flag.
The flag is the symbol, most times peacefully, Americans are using to show their patriotism, their defiance to terrorism. Flag makers can't keep up with demand. On a Los Angeles street corner today, 300 flags sold in just 10 minutes.
In support of America.
Donations are beginning to pour in. NBC New Orleans affiliate WDSU raised $300,000 for victims in just 24 hours.
God bless you, sir.
Limited bond trading resumed today with big jumps in prices, and on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, a moment of silence.
To observe a minute of silence in recognition of the victims.
Hollywood is silencing some of its movies, too. One producer said it was shocking to see real life imitate art. Ads for a new Spider-Man thriller have been pulled, a trailer showing the superhero spinning his web between New York's Twin Towers. At least 7 new action thrillers are being rewritten right now.
When that violence comes home to people, when it is real as opposed to comic book, then suddenly the whole context has changed, and so it's not in good taste anymore.
The NFL also decided today it would not be in good taste to have football games this Sunday, canceling its entire 15-game schedule. One final note, Tom, when baseball resumes, every professional player will wear an American flag on his sleeve. Every fan will get an American flag at the entrance. And before every game, everyone will be asked to sing, "God Bless America." Tom?
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Roger O'Neill tonight reporting from Denver. And of course, the tragedy here in this country has shocked and horrified people around the world. With the extraordinary international reaction tonight, here's NBC's Dana Lewis reporting from London.
Outside Buckingham Palace, a break with one of England's oldest traditions. Today, for the first time, the American anthem played during the changing of the guard to honor those who died in the attack on the U.S. British and American citizens, allies in the past, now standing shoulder to shoulder in another time of trouble.
Unbelievably comforting to Americans to hear the wonderful sympathy that has been expressed by the English people.
2 minutes of silence observed by the British Guard and by people struggling to comprehend the human toll.
Well, it's just hard to know that 15,000 families or more than that are just destroyed for no reason. I mean, it's just real hard.
Europe is asking, could it be next? Britain beefing up security, 1,000 extra police on patrol. Paris, a sea of candles. In cathedrals, deep sympathy for America. Germany came to a stop. Factories closed. School children carried messages of support. Russia, the Kremlin clock tower signaled a minute of silence. State TV stopped broadcasting. Hundreds placed flowers outside the U.S. Embassy. I want to say that America is our friend, he says. Even in the Middle East, where some Palestinians first danced in joy when America was attacked, later their leader Yasser Arafat donates blood and expresses shock. In airports across the world, stranded Americans desperate to go home. Those who can't go home cling to symbols, the American flag. The Roosevelt statue in London has become a makeshift memorial. Among those who signed a book of condolences at the American Embassy today, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
We stand with them for freedom, for rule of law, for democracy.
Today, the British government announced roughly 500 British citizens were lost in the attack on the World Trade Center. Tomorrow, here at St. Paul's Cathedral, the Queen will be part of a special memorial service to honor British and American victims of Tuesday's terror. Dana Lewis, NBC News, London.
And of course, this country is undergoing psychological trauma as well. We've asked NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bazell to report on that.
New Yorkers on the street today, still dazed from what they have witnessed.
It's really the landscape of New York has changed, and I think their psychic landscape has changed, and that's something that is going to take a long time to process.
Grief, rage, fear, and a feeling of simply being numb. All common, experts say, in these first days after an enormous tragedy.
How do we deal with 10,000 or 8,000, does it matter, gone at one time? I don't know if our minds can ever grasp it. I think it's a concept that is beyond human comprehension.
How to handle it? Experts say crying, talking, screaming, hugging, whatever it takes. Dr. Joanne DeFiti studied survivors of the 1993 World Trade Center explosion.
Well, is there any shoulds in terms of how people should respond to all that stimulus?
No. We each perceive the world a little bit differently, so how we actually cope will depend upon what our coping style was the day before this happened.
But some people, about 1 in 6, develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a mental condition that lasts for months, even years, that can be characterized by recurring images of the terrible event, a lasting feeling of numbness, or fearful reaction to many of life's typical situations. Dr. David Silberswag uses brain imaging to study people with PTSD.
It is certainly a real brain problem, and increasingly with brain imaging technology, we and others are beginning to be able to piece together the parts of the brain that are affected.
What he sees is that a system of the brain that normally responds to threats and fear becomes overstimulated and stays on constantly. Experts say if the emotions most people are feeling now persist for weeks, it is critical to get counseling or medication.
They should get evaluated by someone who's qualified to do the evaluation and see whether or not they need intervention, because if this disorder becomes chronic, it becomes very hard to treat.
The people who are most at risk, the experts say, are those who had the greatest loss, being at the site or losing a loved one. But everyone says that at this time of great loss, there's great danger for many people. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Bazell tonight. Among the stories and images that are emerging from all this, some that will linger forever. A photographer captured the image of firefighters raising the American flag in the midst of devastation, a photo that brought to mind another evocative image from another war, Iwo Jima. Then there are the unforgettable stories that we're hearing more and more now, the last telephone calls, the goodbyes that became the final goodbye. Sean Hughes says he always loved the sound of his wife's voice. He never dreamed that Tuesday night might be the last time he'd ever hear it.
Sean, it's me.
His wife, Melissa, 101 stories above Manhattan, a telephone call from Tower 1.
I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went up.
Sean and Melissa celebrated their first wedding anniversary just 23 days ago. Still missing, ignoring the worst, a husband searching for a wife. And so as the terrorism is investigated and retaliation is planned, a sober reminder. In Pennsylvania, at the Pentagon, and at the World Trade Center, a building which once had 43,000 windows, a daily workplace to more than 50,000 people, thousands of lives, families, voices lost forever.
We don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
That's Nightly News. I'll see you later with continuing coverage.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Good evening, I'm Gabe Della. I'm Brian Martin. We interrupt NBC coverage to bring you a very special 10 NBC report.
We want to hear your thoughts on this horrific event. We'll be taking your live calls in just a bit. First, we'd like to update you on the day's events. You are looking at a live picture now of New York City.
5,100 people are still missing. That's the latest official word. Rescue work is being hampered by the buckling of some top floors of a nearby damaged skyscraper. Let's go to Shelley Rubando for the very latest from New York City. Shelley.
I'm in Lower Manhattan, where today many New Yorkers returned to the city under a much different New York skyline. One woman described losing the Twin Towers like losing a guardian angel that looked over the city. We caught up with the RIT graduate who lives in New York now and remembers the last time she saw the skies above Manhattan before they changed forever.
I like to come in that way because you get a shot of the Statue of Liberty, and then you get the whole skyline. And my boyfriend usually sleeps on the way in, but luckily he was awake, and I was like, oh, I'm so glad you're awake, because look at it. It's gorgeous. It was one of those crystal clear nights where you could just see everything. And we had just a short discussion about it, because I said, you know, no matter how conflicted I ever feel about living in New York, I just, you know, it's like any time when you come home, you just, you see it. I really feel that this is my home, and I'm a New Yorker, and if I'm needed here in any way, I want to be here.
Coming up tonight at 11, we'll talk to some state troopers from Rochester down here assisting in the effort. Reporting from Manhattan, Shelley Rubando, News 10 NBC.
All right, Shelley, thanks. Now, all across the country, airlines are allowed to fly tonight, but only if they've met the new strict security measures. Officials have beefed up security at airports all across the country. The Rochester airport remains closed at this hour.
At the Pentagon, crews have officially switched from a rescue to a recovery operation. Brett Davidson joins us live from Washington, D.C. Brett, of course, there were some tense moments at the Capitol today as well.
That's right, Gabe. It seems there are new developments out of Washington, D.C. every hour. Just last hour, the Capitol building was evacuated after somebody found what appeared to be a suspicious package, and Vice President Cheney was flown to Camp David for safety purposes. There have also been several threats called into the Pentagon during the course of the day. At the Pentagon today, the recovery efforts continue. Defense Department officials say there are 190 people dead or unaccounted for. Among them, Navy Commander William Donovan Jr. of Nunday, who is still listed as missing. The official word is that this is now a recovery effort and no longer a rescue effort, although search teams do hold out hope that maybe they'll find someone alive. This is a massive undertaking at the Pentagon, but pales in size and scope to the efforts underway in New York. President Bush will tour that city's destruction tomorrow, and for that, New York's junior Senator Hillary Clinton is grateful.
I'm very pleased that the President will be going to New York tomorrow afternoon. I applaud and salute him for that decision. I know it was a difficult decision because of the security issues that surround the movement of any president. And I want personally, on behalf of my constituents, to thank him.
And we can tell you that police have now declared that the Capitol building is safe to re-enter. Congressional members are going back into the Capitol now. President Bush has also declared tomorrow a National Day of Remembrance to honor the dead and the missing. Reporting live from Washington, D.C., Brett Davidson, News 10 NBC.
Brett, last night you told us that there was heightened security around the various monuments in the nation's capital. Is that still true tonight?
We expect that to be the case, although we don't know for sure yet. I can tell you there are still heavy patrols of police on every corner. There are still National Guard members in military Humvees at many of the corners, and we often see the police helicopters circling around the city. So security is still tight here in the nation's capital.
All right, Brett Davidson reporting for us live in Washington, D.C. Thanks.
Obviously, this is, continues to remain the topic of conversation, people talking about it. Again, we talk about what the news is here. Tonight, we want to do something a little different. We want to take your phone calls. We want to hear what you have to say, what you think about the terrorist attacks.
We have Jennifer from Williamson standing by. Jennifer?
Hi.
You are not sure if we should retaliate, is that true?
I don't think so, because I feel like we're saying that whoever did this is evil, but I think we're just feeding into their evil by doing this, by retaliating.
So is there an appropriate response ever for violence, or should we just sort of paint a bullseye on our heads?
I think we need to ask God what he would want us to do, and I think we should listen to him instead of our anger right now.
All right, Jennifer, thank you for your call.
A lot of people have talked about the judicial system going to courts, but then they bring up the Pan Am Flight 103 tragedy that happened in the 80s, and they say, well, they went to a court, you know, and look what happened. I mean, still, the terrorism continues.
And there is a philosophical argument among those who are pacifists and truly righteous in their beliefs, and those who say that sometimes violence, in fact, is justified and is proper. Obviously, what happened in World War II and other conflicts might be examples.
Right. As far as some of the emails that we have received, Debbie from Canada writes, I have been sitting here since the start of these terrible crimes, and please let Americans know that we Canadians are crying and praying for all. I support strong and precise actions against these animals.
We have Vince from Rochester standing by on the telephone. Vince?
How are you doing tonight?
All right. And this event, do you think, made us stronger as a nation? Is that what you believe?
It's been a really hard time for all of us, and I've never seen so much support from everybody around us, and it's all through America, and it made us stronger. It really didn't hurt us. So.
It's really kind of neat to see, Vince, because there's been a lot of people, so many people buying American flags, so many people gathering together in this time. I think tomorrow, 7 o'clock, there's been some word circulating that everybody's supposed to step outside, light a candle. Talk about that. What do you think about it?
Everybody's hearts are, as much as people have done just to show up and have police direct traffic because they're donating. It hurts so bad, and it just shows how much we're stronger inside as a country we are.
Well, sometimes things like this can make a country and a community stronger.
It's so hard to hurt everybody, and it'll make us all stronger, and I pray for everybody that has to deal with it.
All right, Vince, thank you very much.
Thanks, Vince.
We have another email from a viewer who writes, I never thought that this could happen in our great country. These monsters have taken away our sense of safety and security. How dare they do that? I am so angry and saddened by these events. My heart, my prayers go out to all the victims and their families, and a huge thank you to all those who are participating in the rescue efforts. We will survive this together. I believe that Mr. Bush has spoken for the country and has all of our support in making sure that those responsible will pay for these horrific acts. God bless America.
Let's go to Lynn now on the phone. Lynn, thanks for joining us from Rochester. Lynn, you say you're upset with TV's coverage of these events. Talk about that.
Well, just a little bit. I mean, obviously, I'm hurt and I'm angry and I'm sad with all that this has happened. We've been glued to our TVs since Tuesday. But it seems that in the last 12 hours, 24 hours, all we're hearing about are the families of the rescue people.
The families of whom?
The firemen and the policemen who have lost, who are missing.
Rather than all the other people who've suffered and who've been victims.
Right. I mean, they have stories and they have families and they have children too, and it just seems like I'm very grateful for the rescue people, but there's thousands of other people missing too.
I think half of the problem, Lynn, with this is the fact that we still don't know who a lot of those people are. I think we know who the firefighters were that went up into some of those buildings that might have perished when the buildings collapsed, but there are still, I think, 5,100 is the current number missing from New York City. We're not sure exactly who those people are.
Well, I just don't want us to forget them.
All right. Lynn, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, Sheila, one of our other viewers, who writes, it has taken me until tonight for events to start to sink in. I guess many of us feel this way.
Absolutely.
It is like losing a family member, but thousands of times over. All I can do is to pray and not let hate become part of me. If we start to hate, we are no better than the ones who did this terrible act of horror. May God bless us all. We need to stay strong and pull together.
All right, Dan is on the phone. Dan is from Greece. Dan, you think that this is it's a great tragedy. You think that we need to continue to try to find who's responsible for this. Is that right?
What I had told them earlier is that I think it's important for the country to continue the good work that they're doing at trying to normalize what is a very tragic situation. Obviously, all of us are going to be affected by this.
Well, what do you mean normalize?
You know, our country's never going to be the same, and it's going to take a long time for our country to recover, but I think the government has done a good job at trying to take a tragedy and bring together America. I mean, flag sales higher than they've ever been ever before, probably, in our country. You hear about how when baseball goes back into play, they'll all wear American flags on their uniforms, that American flags will be handed to everyone. Those are important things. Everyone's going to have a story to attach to this. We're going to tell our kids, we're going to tell our grandkids about it. But one thing that we can do is we can unify as a nation to become stronger, to help each other out, and to make sure that, you know, we give our kids an extra kiss, we give our wife an extra kiss, and those that we love, you know, that we reach out as a nation to each other and we support each other, because obviously this is going to take a long time and a long healing process down the road, and we want to make sure that everyone does get healed. I mean, we're not going to forget all the other people, like you guys said. We're going to put a face on them as we find out who they are, and that's going to be when it really sinks in for Americans, and we're going to have to make sure that we take care of each other as Americans.
Well put.
Yeah, life goes on, basically, is what we're hearing from Dan. There's a comment from one of the passengers that's been trying to get onto an aircraft today. As the nation's skies finally start to reopen, the passenger says, whatever happens, happens. He says, you have to keep going. If you stop living life, they've won. It's kind of, I think that's kind of the thought as we kind of, you know, progress from these days.
It's difficult, but it has to be
done.
It's difficult to get back to normal, but I suppose that is what needs to be done to defeat these terrorists, at least for the time being. Another viewer writes, let's go to Shirley right now, who's from Irondequoit. And Shirley, you would just want everyone to say, God bless America? Is that
you bet we do. We are just saddened. We're senior citizens, and we have never seen anything like this. I hope to God we never do again. And we just, all day yesterday, everybody we met, my husband and I, God bless America, God bless America, passed it on, because we're pulling together as a nation and as a country. Never mind our party affiliation. And after seeing all the legislatures standing on the Capitol steps the other evening singing God bless America, it just broke us up. We've done nothing but cry, cry, cry through this. I can't visualize this.
We have a lot more in common than we do differences in this country. And Shirley, did you happen to hear or see the Royal Guard in front of Buckingham Palace?
Oh, I certainly did.
And was that not emotional? And
yes,
was that not a tearjerker to see that happen?
Yes, it was. It was just fantastic. I've never thought we'd ever see that in London. I mean, in London, in Hamburg, everybody is stopping. It's just...
We've done a lot for the rest of the world, and apparently they've realized that it's time to give us a bit of respect.
Yeah, I think so, but I agree with Shirley. I mean, it's almost like everywhere you go, whether you're going to the store, whether you're walking down the street, there's just kind of a sense of pulling together. There's a sense of unity, almost, if you will. You know, you walk down the street, and you're all part of the same squad now. You put up the flag, and, you know, we're all kind of in this together at the same time. It's kind of bonding, I guess.
I think we have another email. I am a high school student. I am of the generation which will grow up with this imprinted in our minds and our thoughts along with the rest of the country. Along with the rest of the country, I'm shocked, disgusted, and pained. Every story I read, every news report I watch, I become more and more horrified and feel more and more helpless. This is an event that will never be forgotten.
We have Glenda from Rochester on the phone right now. Glenda, I understand you want to share an email from your brother who's over in England.
Yes, and he was here exactly a year ago, and this is what he wrote. The horror that has occurred in your country is almost beyond comprehension. There can be no political, religious, or financial cause that can justify such insanity. The case that you are not aware of, the whole of England, Europe, and the world are united in their condemnation of this unspeakable action, and I'm sure would back your government in any action that it takes to redress the world balance.
All right.
And that's
all right, Glenda, thank you very much for the phone call. We appreciate that email. Another viewer, we have another email from a person who says, I am only 14 years old, but I cannot believe what another would do just to terrorize the lives of many in America. To all the innocent victims and their families, also to those determined firefighters and safety crews, we are praying for you, and although some of us cannot reach you with supplies, blood, and other donations, we send our condolences out to you and anyone who has to suffer the tragic loss of their family member. Never give up hope.
We have John from Rochester standing by on the phone. John?
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm a baby boomer, and for the first time in my life, I'm able to relate to my parents and how they must have felt on December 7th, 1941. I want people to remember that this was not a crime perpetrated against the United States. This was an act of war to the tune of possibly 20,000. I want that to sink into people's minds. 20,000 people killed.
Also a little different than going after a military target. Not that that was justified, obviously, in the case of Pearl Harbor, but here you're talking about innocent civilians with no anti-aircraft guns to protect them or anything.
This is not the time for dissension. It's not the time to knock the team. We need to come together. Now, last night, about 10:30, before I went to bed, I put a flag up on my house. I live on a very small street, about 12 houses. When I woke up this morning, 4 more houses had flags on it. It's not enough. I want to see flags on every house. I want us to come together. If you can't buy a flag, make a flag. I want everyone to show that we are all on the same team. We do not need to knock the team today. If the president wants me to do anything, the only question I would have for him is what line he wants me to stand in, and we need to show our solidarity.
John, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, John compares, well, there has been a lot of comparison to Pearl Harbor. We've talked a lot, not we, but the news coverage has talked a lot about Pearl Harbor, comparing it back and forth. 2,400 servicemen and women died during Pearl Harbor. Here, we're talking possibly up to 10 times as many.
An email from Stephanie, and she writes, I am so glad to see the American people come out and try to contribute. I donated blood yesterday and waited over 5 hours to do so because of so many people there. I am glad to see that everyone's thoughts and prayers are with the families who lost loved ones.
We have Bill in Webster. Bill, are you on the phone? How are you today?
I'm well tonight, Gabe.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bill, I understand you have concerns about the media. You have concerns about the killing of innocent people. Tell us what's on your mind tonight.
Well, it has bothered me, I think, probably since the Gulf War became a primetime TV show that it seems like the media is constantly announcing, well, we're going to do this, we're going to bomb this area, and then we're going to do this. We're giving these enemies or whatever advance notice, and then maybe they can make their counterattack plans or preventative measures to
so you want the
keep us from getting our target.
You want the speculation to stop and just let our government handle it and see what happens.
Well, yeah, exactly. And again, they're announcing where George Bush is going to be in New York, and I mean, I know that it's important for him to go there, but they're announcing his every move, and even on Tuesday, well, he's going to this place and he's going to that place.
Well, one of the reasons we got attacked, I think, is we are a free society, and one of the prices many prices we pay is that we have to tell people what's going on. So.
At the same time, Bill, what right do you think Americans have to know that we are in a state of retaliation, that we are going to be fighting back to some coward act that happens like this to our country? Do you think that the people have a right to know, in this anger that we're all feeling right now, that we are doing something about this?
I think that we have to have faith, number one, in our system of government and in our military, that the right action will take place and the appropriate action will take place, and as well as a faith in God that, again, my concern is also the knee-jerk reaction. I've heard several people say, well, 3 bombs and three nuclear bombs and we can be done.
That's just,
and
that is
collateral damage. That would make us no better than
well,
they.
you know that is not really how most people feel, but it's an emotional reaction, and we can understand that. Thank you very much for your call.
Bill, thanks for your phone call tonight. Susie writes in an email to us, I have never been so proud to be an American. I went to the store today to purchase blankets and pillows and waited in line for a long time behind people also purchasing these items. We then all waited in traffic line behind people dropping these items today to be shipped to New York City. The response to the blood drives, the response to the emergency help has been so amazing. It makes me very proud to be a part of this country, this very fine country. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone tonight as we are all being affected by this, and especially with the families and victims of the tragedies.
We have Walt standing by. Walt is from Fairport. How are you?
Fine.
All right.
As Americans, our hearts are broken and we feel saddened by all these people who have lost their loved ones. As a nation, we have been grossly violated, and we have to take action against these terrorists. We cannot be pussyfoots like we were with Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War. When these terrorists come on our soil, it's time for us to act, and act now.
Well, let's ask you. You obviously feel that firm and specific action is needed.
Yes.
Aside from military action, aside from arresting, possibly, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, possibly killing people who are responsible and all those things, what other things can you do against terrorists who live among us?
I guess we have to take firm action against anybody that we think has terrorist activity or has been associated with terrorists. Be stricter with our laws on governing who comes into this country and who has the liberty of getting citizenship to live here.
Sadly, the last major terrorist act in this country was perpetrated by someone who was born and raised in this country, just a few miles west of us. So, anyway, we have Craig on our email system writing to us. I pray for the families and friends who knew someone who died. I was in shock and disbelief that this happened. We thank you all for writing to us email. Here is Wendy's comment. Like many others, I have a heavy heart because of the recent attack on America, but I'm also proud to be part of such a great country where people don't think twice about themselves and jump right in, trying to help in some way. My only hope is that this feeling of patriotism and unity doesn't fade away in the coming months or years. We must always remember our losses with respect and never take our freedom for granted. Wendy writes that.
We want to go to Sarah now in Spencerport. Sarah, thanks for joining us. We understand you have a special flag to fly. Tell us about it.
Yes, my husband has a flag that flew over the White House. It has been in storage in the cedar chest for 20 years that I know of. I've pulled it out and we're going to fly it tomorrow.
Very nice, Sarah. We, my wife and I got a flag actually that was flown over the Capitol for our wedding as a wedding present, and that's a flag that we keep very sacred to us as well. Yes. I understand the nationalism that it brings out of each one of us.
Yes, it is nice. It's a nice thought. I'm glad that people have thought of it, and I'm proud to fly the flags in honor of those who are serving our country, have served our country, and continue to help those who are hurt.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much for your phone call. Let's go back to the emails. We have Sharon, I believe, this time. Is that right? If we can pull up an email. Yes, we have Sharon who writes, I feel sad for our children, our future. They live in fear enough from all the violence that is surrounding our community now and then. People hijack planes to purposely kill thousands of people. What do we tell our children? I am sorry that our world is not a better place. My thoughts and prayers are with the victims and families and all our children. I am scared for us all. That's been a very difficult thing. What do you tell the kids when they're asking and they're watching this video?
And when you talk about
TV?
Kids, you're really not just talking about 3, 4, 5, 8, or 10-year-olds. You're talking about My daughter, for instance, is a junior in college. We talked to her several times the day this tragedy happened, and you know, we were all upset. I mean, she had many questions. She is going to school near Boston, so that was a particular concern to her, because one of the pilots is from Dracut in Massachusetts, which is you know, which is very, very close to where she is. So it's really awful.
Yeah.
Russ from Brighton is on the phone. Russ?
Yeah, how you doing, guys?
How are you?
Good. Just a little incident that happened today.
Yes, sir.
Just at work, a gentleman flagged me down, and he actually had the United States flag in his hand, and he was trying to keep it up off the ground. He needed help hanging it. So, of course, I ran over there and helped him, and we were hoping we got it displayed right. That was most of his concern. And I guess the flag was from World War II.
Wow.
And, you know, he just wanted to get it up. And, you know, with everything going on later on in the day, someone else had seen the flag, and they exclaimed that, you know, why is that up there? I don't like it. And my heart just sunk.
Wow.
You know, it was like,
what did you do?
bad as they felt on Tuesday morning.
Oh, boy.
You know, just hearing that.
Well, Russ, we appreciate your call, and
Thank you.
I hope that flag will fly proudly.
Yeah, back to the emails. Carol writes now, united we stand with hearts and hands. My thoughts, my prayers go out to all the families and loved ones that have been robbed by this act of cowardice. Pray for the emergency personnel that have and will see the worst of this tragedy in the coming days and weeks. Pray that they will have peace of mind and heart in their efforts.
All right, I think we might want to go to another email. We have a lot of Canadian viewers, and one of them, Mark from Canada, writes, as a Canadian citizen, I extend my deepest sympathy. The Canadian people stand by America shoulder to shoulder and will do anything necessary to assist in ending any future threats.
Sharon, we understand you're on the phone now, Sharon. You think that you're from Fairport, first of all. You think we need to do a better job of security in our nation's airports?
Yes, sir. I think our intelligence is fantastic. I think that the energy and dollars that we put in with security needs to be much more intense. And I think that a little bit of patience that the Americans need, it's not going to be a problem for us not giving our luggage up.
Well, you know, part of the security problem, and there have been studies about this, where plainclothes people have gone through airports, part of the security problem is that it's compromised often not where passengers embark on airplanes, but other places, luggage handling and mechanics and things of that sort.
Excuse me for a second. Am I speaking to a recorded message, or is this Dave
No,
Gelman?
this is me. This is me.
Okay. I have worked, and I'm surprised you don't have them, that you're talking to. I have worked with Safe Passage. I have worked with trainings of security people.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's why I'm surprised that that's what we're dealing with, and that's why...
Yeah, and the studies indicate that 65% of the time, many of these security checkpoints, people going to the tarmac and things of that sort have been compromised, and so that's going to have to be changed.
Sharon, thanks for the phone call. There's definitely going to be a change at the nation's airports from now on, every time we take a flight anywhere across the country.
All right, we have another email. Donna, I believe, is writing to us. She says, I wonder what the Statue of Liberty would say overlooking the whole nightmare. I'm sure she would have a tear coming down her cheek for America and her children. How true.
We have another email from Yvonne who writes, I have watched in awe and horror since September 11th, 2001, the events that have turned our country into total chaos. My thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. I find some form of comfort in all the American flags that are flying in our area at this time. In my opinion, this shows the unity that our country is sharing. I have the utmost confidence in our government at this moment, and I believe that they will find the right solution to let these countries know that America will not tolerate this type of behavior. Life will go on for some, but all of our lives have been changed in some way since September 11th, 2001. God bless everyone.
We have Jeanette from Irondequoit. Jeanette, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Yes, ma'am. What is...
Go ahead, Jeanette.
Your thought?
Well, I believe that those brave citizens on the plane that went down in Pennsylvania and who threw their cell phones to their families said that they were going to try to subdue the hijackers at any cost because they knew they were doomed anyway. They should be awarded the Medal of Honor from the President for the heroic deed that probably averted a more serious catastrophe. I believe that plane was headed for the White House, and that is unthinkable.
Well, it's a very, very good suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those men are definitely heroes for sadly enough, bringing down the plane in Pennsylvania. Well, we thank you very much again for your phone calls. We once again apologize for those of you who were not able to get on the air. That is the latest from News 10 NBC.
We now head back to NBC's live network coverage. Please join us again at 11 as we continue to bring you late-breaking developments.
Good night.
An act of war was declared on the United States of America.
Tonight, a determined president and nation. Hijackers are identified, leads multiplied in the global search for the prime suspect.
Terrorism is a crime against all humanity, and that's why we are calling it a war.
Travelers trickle back to the skies under tough security. New buildings on the brink of collapse and signs of life from beneath the debris. A heartbreaking parade of hope for the thousands still lost.
Judy, we love you, baby. Judy, call us, please.
A fierce day of resolution and emotion.
I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it.
In the attack on America. Good evening, I'm Tom Brokaw, and here's what we know at this hour. It is shortly after 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and the FBI now has positively identified all 18 of the suspected hijackers. Before this evening is out, we could have photographs of them. 7 people are in custody at 2 New York airports tonight. Reportedly, they produced pilot licenses which appear to be counterfeit. There is now no service out of New York airports. Searchers have recovered the flight data recorder from the plane that went down in Pennsylvania and picked up a signal from the black box in the jet that slammed into the Pentagon. At least they hope it's a signal. Coming up tonight, we'll have the latest on the investigation, remarkable stories of courage, the heartbreaking stories of families still searching for their loved ones. I'll also have a conversation with Senator Hillary Clinton, who will be joining Tim Russert in Washington. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani will be talking to us. We'll be talking with General Norman Schwarzkopf and with the Republican and Democratic leadership of the House of Representatives. We'll begin tonight, however, with NBC's Pete Williams and the very latest on this investigation. Pete?
Tom, we're not probably going to see now the Justice Department is telling us pictures of the 18 hijackers. They had said earlier this afternoon that they would release the names of the hijackers and photographs of those that they could clearly document. Now they're pulling back on that, apparently concerned about the accuracy of some of the photographs. And that did seem somewhat over-optimistic earlier today on the Justice Department's part that they could get that information to us, given all how careful they usually are about these things. So that's part of the investigation, identifying those 18 hijackers. They now say 5 hijackers each on the 2 aircraft that left Boston and flew into the World Trade Center, 4 each on the other 2 planes, the one that went from Washington Dulles into the Pentagon, the other that went from Newark and crash landed in Pennsylvania. The other part of this investigation trying to identify the associates who may still be at large and could pose a potential danger. Now, here is an interesting statistic. At this point, the FBI agents have opened this many cases, 4,000 active investigative leads. Now, that's not telephone tips. That's not internet phone call or internet tips from people with just reporting suspicious activity in the neighborhood. This is actual leads for FBI agents to follow up. Easy to understand how you get there. You take 18 hijackers, you multiply that by the number of phone calls they made, internet times they used email, transactions, credit card purchases. It sends out a very large number of people, and that's what the FBI is trying to figure out. Nonetheless, investigators say tonight, they have identified some of these people, some who are intimates. Apparently, they're very concerned about a person who was arrested tonight or earlier today in Germany after a tip they gave to German officials. But here's the key question. Could there have been other terror attacks planned by these people who were involved in this large conspiracy? What a senior administration official tells me tonight is that there is no indication that there was such an attack They have no evidence to indicate there were other attacks planned on Tuesday that were somehow foiled or that were planned for subsequent days. But this official says, quote, would be foolish to assume that that was it. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams tonight. The very latest on the investigation. Israel, of course, has long lived with the daily threat of terrorism. One of Israel's toughest hawks is former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I spoke with him earlier today, and he issued this very blunt warning.
And this, I think, has been a wake-up call from hell. It is telling us, you have the power now to act, summon the will, because the terrorists have the will to destroy America, to destroy freedom, to destroy all of America's allies and all the democracies, Israel being simply on the front line. They have the will, but they don't have the power.
That's former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And joining me now from Washington is the House Democratic leader, Richard Gephardt of Missouri. Congressman, let me say, first of all, I've never seen such bipartisan unanimity in Washington in many, many years.
Well, Tom, there's no air and there's no light between the President and the Congress and between the Republican and Democratic parties. We stand shoulder to shoulder. We're going to take up a resolution tonight for an appropriation of probably $40 billion to give the resources the President needs and that we all need to solve this problem.
And Congressman, there has been a movement in the Senate, at least, to get some kind of sense of Congress down on paper, if not an official declaration of war. Do you think that that's going to be appropriate?
Well, I think in the next 2 days we'll be taking up in the House and Senate a resolution to give the President the legal authority to go after the folks who perpetrated this violence and to try to prevent further acts of violence from happening to the United States.
There is an economic reality to all of this as well. Just 3 days ago, there was great concern about what is happening to the surplus. Some talk about rolling back parts of the tax cut. Do you think that that will become necessary given the cost of this operation and the hit that the American economy understandably will take?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. We'll get to those economic questions after we get done what we need to do right now, which is address this problem. But let me say something to you. After Pearl Harbor, this country went through a 5-year war. We won that war. We spent lots of resources doing it, and we involved all of our population. I hope this isn't that kind of war and doesn't last that long, but we've got to anticipate that it might, and I do not think it'll hurt our economy. I think ultimately we'll prevail, and our economy will be back, and our freedom will be back as well.
During World War II, as you know very well, there were some major sacrifices made by the American people on the home front, and they were more than happy to do that. Also, some suspension of civil liberties. Will that be necessary as well?
Well, I hope we don't do it in exactly the way we did it in World War II. We imprisoned Japanese Americans wrongly. That took away people's civil liberties in a wrong way. We need to find a new balance, clearly, between freedom and security, and we're going to all work together. I said to the President the other day, we've all got to lead all of us to a conclusion for balancing those conflicting goals in a better way. We live in a new world. It's never going to be the same as it was. We have to, though, fight terrorism and have the will to fight this so that we succeed.
Thank you very much, Richard Gephardt, who is the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, the longtime congressman from the state of Missouri. During the course of our coverage tonight, we'll also be speaking, we trust, with the House Speaker Dennis Hastert of Illinois, the leading Republican in the House. And joining me now from very near the World Trade Center is NBC's David Bloom with the latest on the recovery and rescue efforts that are going on down there. David?
Well, Tom, we just heard a pretty frightening sound here in Lower Manhattan. That's the sound of the evacuation horns sounding. That happened just a few minutes ago. The workers, the rescue workers, running quickly, literally stampeding down the road toward us, away from that. This has become a fairly constant sound here in Lower Manhattan throughout today. Essentially what's happening, of course, is that they're working amidst this fallen rubble. The great news today is that 3 firefighters were recovered. Now, I hasten to add, to the best of our knowledge and everything that we've learned, these were not people trapped inside after Tuesday's attack. Rather, they're firefighters trapped in the shifting debris, in the falling rubble, in the sometimes partially collapsing buildings. that they're still coping with here in Lower Manhattan. Again, these 3 firefighters trapped and then rescued all in the span of today. Again, Tom, it's a very perilous situation here because they're so worried about the structural integrity of the buildings surrounding the World Trade Center. The other significant development that several police officers leaving the scene told us about today, Tom, is that on the south side of the South Twin Tower, they were hearing tapping sounds late this afternoon. Tapping sounds that they told us they understand come from a woman tapping inside, perhaps someone still alive from the wreckage from Tuesday. Those rescue workers are staying there, Tom, atop that shifting rubble, despite the concerns about what might happen if that rubble shifts any more than it already has. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. Very likely we could be coming back to you before the end of this evening. That's a quick update on what has been going on tonight after about 5:30 Eastern Time. It was a very busy day with fast-breaking developments. We want to put it all in context for you now and take you through it moment by moment. Here's Dateline's Stone Phillips.
Morning, 48 hours after the world exploded. 48 hours that seem like forever. New York City struggles to get back on its feet. For many, today is the first day back on the job, the first attempt at returning to life as it was. But how is that even possible?
Nothing could be quite normal, but this seems much more normal than it was yesterday.
There's no energy. People are just kind of like sleepwalking.
For tens of thousands of workers here, there is simply no office to go to. Their buildings reduced to rubble or crumbling masonry. The Twin Towers, gone. The 47-story tower at 7 World Trade Center, toppled. The 54-story tower at 1 Liberty Plaza, 3 blocks from the Trade Center, disintegrating. And numerous other buildings uninhabitable. 9 a.m. After a difficult morning commute, another transportation snarl as the investigation reaches across New York Harbor to Staten Island.
Staten Island has essentially been shut down. The bridges have been closed going in and out of that borough of New York. Why? It is believed that the car that was used by one of the hijackers named Mohammed Atta may be there on Staten Island. They're trying to locate it. In the meantime, they're not letting anybody go in or out of Staten Island.
In the tangled, still smoldering wreckage of the Trade Center towers, emergency teams continue their around-the-clock work. At about 10 a.m., the reason they are driving themselves to exhaustion.
I believe that there's a good possibility that there's people in that building that are alive, and that's why we are treating this as a rescue effort still. This is not a recovery. We are trying to get in every possible void, every possible area that we can to try to see if there are people that we can save.
But this morning's statistics threaten to overwhelm the flickering hopes of finding many alive amidst the tons of debris. New York Mayor Giuliani.
We now have a count of 94 bodies that have been recovered, 46 of which have been identified. We have the gruesome and horrible situation that in many cases we recover only parts of bodies, and we have 70 in that category.
Another number speaks graphically to the carnage. To hold all those pieces of the human wreckage, the mayor tells reporters that the city has waiting 30,000 body bags. And then there is the list of the missing.
We have 4,763 people on the missing persons list. That's a list that's as inclusive as we can make it. It includes the plane itself, the manifest. It includes people that have been identified to us by family members.
And all over the city, pictures handed out by desperate families. This is Tim Stout, a father of 3 who was working on the 103rd floor of the North Tower, one of 680 missing from his company alone. Michael Lepore's office was on the 97th floor. Missing from his firm, another 700. Their families are hoping to find them, even if it's in a hospital bed. That's where Arthur Del Bianco's family found him, his leg broken, his respect unbounded for the courage of the rescuers.
The firemen were phenomenal. They're true heroes. They were there. They went back in over and over again. Even after the first building started coming down, those guys went back inside. They went back inside.
Do you have the sense that there are still people underground?
I want to believe that there's still people alive.
At the Pentagon this morning, the talk is no longer of people missing.
We're in what we call a recovery mode, which means that we're now trying to recover the remains of the body, make the situation as safe as we possibly can.
The death toll now estimated at 126 on the ground, 64 on the plane, diverted by hijackers into the west wall of the Pentagon, causing a gaping hole as floors and ceilings collapsed. From the field in western Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 went down, short of the hijackers' intended target, news of just how tough the recovery effort will be.
It's very difficult to tell the actual depth of the crater because of that, the amount of dust there, and also what evidence is in the crater. So to the naked eye, there's not a whole lot there now. That's why we have archaeologists who are here on scene and will be working on that site so that we can properly recover that information.
So far, no word that the black box flight recorder has been found. But there are other hints of the harrowing final moments from air traffic controllers in contact with the jet.
They do have recordings inside of the cockpit where they hear not only voices of the pilots, but once those voices diminish, they hear somebody else. They say they hear foreign voices, other voices, and more screaming aboard that plane.
No word either on the black boxes from the other doomed flights that struck New York's Twin Towers. American Flight 11, which flew south, low over Manhattan, crashing into the first tower. United Flight 175, which 18 minutes later swooped in from the southwest, devastating the second building.
Oh my God!
Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta, 10:30 this morning. The first official word that planes will soon be flying again.
Effective 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, our national airspace system will reopen to commercial aviation.
But Secretary Mineta says there will be new precautions.
From this day forward, we are operating with tightened security.
More extensive passenger screening, an end to curbside check-in, more parking restrictions, armed marshals on flights. Less convenience, Mineta says, but more safety.
Again, I strongly urge all passengers to allow plenty of time to deal with the heightened security procedures and also to exercise patience with airport and airline employees and security personnel.
11 a.m. President Bush calls New York, commending officials there and telling them he will visit the stricken city tomorrow.
I weep and mourn with America. I'm going to a hospital right after this to comfort families. I wish I could comfort every single family whose lives have been affected. But make no mistake about it, my resolve is steady and strong about winning this war that has been declared on America. It's a new kind of war. And I understand it's a new kind of war. And this government will adjust. And this government will call others to join us to make sure this act, these acts, the people who conducted these acts and those who harbor them are held accountable for their actions.
After the call, the president turns to reporters with a message for America, its allies, and its enemies.
The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration. We will be very much engaged in domestic policy, of course. I look forward to working with Congress on a variety of issues. But now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory.
From the Commander-in-Chief, determination and emotion.
Could you give us a sense as to what kind of prayers you are thinking and where your heart is for yourself as you work on that?
I think about myself right now. I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
A short time later, the president visits survivors at a Washington hospital.
A lot of really brave men and women.
Midday, back in New York, the strain is showing. A rescue worker physically and emotionally spent.
He lost his father as a firefighter. This is the first news that his mother's getting that he's all right. He's also telling his mom that he helped rescue someone, that he pulled someone from the rubble. He just told me a few moments ago, Lester, that he held the hand of someone who is down beneath the rubble. We're also hearing reports that there could be as many as 5 firefighters who have just in the last hour and a half or so have been pulled alive.
I had reached down and I felt a guy's hand. My heart goes out. My heart goes out.
Early reports that 5 or 6 rescue workers buried since Tuesday were pulled from a car this morning drew cheers on the streets of Lower Manhattan.
5 firefighters found alive. 2 walked away.
Sadly, it proves not to be true. But there is some good news at Ground Zero.
Do you have any indication at all at this time how many people have been found alive today? You have personally seen and heard of 4 stories.
Yes, 4. That's all they told us, 4. I've seen 2, but we heard 4.
2 civilians, 2 firefighters.
A lucky escape. 2 rescuers buried just this morning by an avalanche of debris pulled free hours later. The unstable remains of the towers are still a deadly peril. By early afternoon, new details on the massive investigation into the attacks, with word from the Attorney General that the public is pitching in.
The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips.
With leads pouring in, investigators say they are now able to reconstruct the terrorist operation with names and numbers.
The total number of hijackers on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
The FBI says this flight training school in Florida is where 2 suspects on the first plane to hit the World Trade Center studied. Rudy Deckers runs the school.
They indicated to us that they wanted to fly big airplanes back home.
Deckers tells the Today Show the pair kept to themselves, but never caused any trouble.
Have you asked yourself 100 times in the last day or so, did you miss a sign of some kind?
They behaved normal. They were average people, and that's it. They left in November, December. We don't keep a track of all the students who come over here, and they left out of our eyesight. Till yesterday, of course.
And there's new information from Boston, where investigators say the hijackers boarded their planes with help from a local terrorist cell. NBC's Chris Hansen.
That a ramp pass was found in a rental car here at Logan Airport that has been linked to 2 of the hijacked suspects. Now, a ramp pass, as its name suggests, is a pass that gives someone access to restricted areas of the airport. Now, this indicates 2 things. 1, that the suspects were casing out the airport in the days before the hijacking, and 2, that perhaps the hijacked suspects had inside help here at the airport.
By mid-afternoon, disturbing news. U.S. officials tell NBC's Andrea Mitchell that other potential hijackers tied in with Tuesday's terrorist operation are still out there.
So we know that there were 18 who went down with those 4 planes, but what I'm now being told is that there were more trained pilots.
In fact, a report today about a strange incident at New York's Kennedy Airport raises questions about how many attacks may have been planned but not carried out.
United Flight 23, scheduled to depart for Los Angeles, was boarding. There was some kind of an altercation involving 3 men described by a Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police source as Middle Eastern in appearance. Somehow, the source will not reveal the exact details. They attracted the suspicions of the gate staff boarding that flight. The staff had some kind of a verbal exchange and demanded that these 3 men leave the aircraft.
Was this a 5th suicide team? Before the day is out, government sources tell NBC News they have concluded that Osama bin Laden is directly responsible for the attacks. Also late today, a major development. Recovered and on its way to Washington, the black box from the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. As evening approaches, the impact of the terrorist attacks is clear. It's been a day of bomb scares and evacuations at New York's Grand Central Station, at Penn Station, LaGuardia Airport, and Rockefeller Center. In Washington, the U.S. Capitol is evacuated, even as congressmen are being briefed on the terrorist attacks. And word that as a precautionary measure, Vice President Cheney is being moved out of Washington to Camp David.
All of that on just the third day of this war on terrorism from Dateline's Stone Phillips. And joining us now from the Pentagon, where he has been contributing to the work of NBC News Terrorism Task Force, is Jim Miklaszewski, who's been on duty almost nonstop since Tuesday morning. What's the latest there, Jim?
Well, Tom, U.S. government officials do tell NBC News tonight that the Bush administration, based on overwhelming evidence, has concluded that Osama bin Laden, among others, is directly responsible for those terrorist attacks earlier this week. Now, according to the officials, there could be other groups involved, believed to be longtime associates or associate groups with Osama bin Laden, that long ago the State Department has sort of lumped together, particularly the Egyptian Jihad, the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which the U.S. government now considers one and the same with Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda group. Now, the question, of course, is what does the U.S. do about that? I think it's quite clear if you listen to President Bush, Secretary of State Colin Powell, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz today, all three were preparing the American people for a long, drawn-out war on terrorism and warning not only terrorist groups, but those who harbor them, that the U.S. will draw on all America's military might to rid the nation, the world actually, of this terrorist threat, not only for this specific attack on New York, but any potential threat to the United States of America. All of these are considered prime targets now. According to the officials, all military options are on the table. No decisions have been made, we stress that, but all military options are on the table. Anything from airstrikes with cruise missiles, sustained airstrike campaigns with planes off aircraft carriers, and from NATO air bases throughout Europe and far West Asia. Even some Persian Gulf nations have weighed in, Kuwait to be expected, but Oman and Qatar have informed the United States that the United States military has free and open access to their military airstrips to launch whatever possible military airstrikes may be carried out. And in regard to the options now being considered, Tom, they go all the way up to a full-scale ground invasion with airborne troops.
All right, thanks very much, NBC. Jim Miklaszewski. Some late developments tonight from the State Department. During a briefing earlier today, Secretary of State Colin Powell was telling reporters about his contact with Pakistan, which does have a relationship with Afghanistan right next door, and he said that they were pursuing those contacts with Pakistan because they believe that people and organizations that could be responsible for this reside in Afghanistan. He was asked then a moment later whether he was referring to Osama bin Laden, and he said yes. Then a number of news organizations began to report that Colin Powell had identified Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect. Tonight, his State Department spokesman is saying, no, he did not use that phrase, prime suspect. In fact, he did not, but he used everything but that phrase. And joining us now from Washington is NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea?
Well, exactly. Colin Powell did not say that Osama bin Laden is the prime suspect, as you just pointed out, as his spokesman, Assistant Secretary of State Richard Boucher, has pointed out to the networks and is making multiple calls to the networks. He said that, but he confirmed to a question that bin Laden was a candidate, the candidate that he was referring to living in that region. But it has been very clear from everything that not only Powell, but that other officials have said, that Osama bin Laden is the person that they are looking towards. Unofficially, people have said that they believe that it is bin Laden, but also in a briefing today at the White House, a senior official said that they believe that there are other groups associated with bin Laden who have contributed to this or who may be related to this. And what we're talking about here is not something as tightly structured as an American corporation. What we're talking about is a loose confederation of terror networks that bin Laden has been leading in many ways. Some of his key deputies are former top leaders of terror groups in Egypt. So it is a loose confederation, not anything that has a chief executive officer, but clearly bin Laden is the chief suspect, if you will, of American suspicion, at least tonight, Tom.
And Andrea, do we have any sense about how Secretary Powell's conversation went with the Pakistani Prime Minister today?
We do. We're told that it went very well, that they got at least some assurances from General Musharraf, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, that they would be cooperative. Now we'll see whether they really deliver.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. And I'm joined now by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Congressman Dennis Hastert of Illinois. We heard just a few moments ago from your Democratic colleague, Richard Gephardt of Missouri, and he was talking about the bipartisan unity in the House of Representatives. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have, if not a formal declaration of war, something that represents the official body, both in the House and the Senate, a reflection of the Senate of the Congress of the United States?
We're going to work on a resolution tomorrow that basically gives the President the ability to use force to go after the terrorists wherever they may be, and a direction to go ahead and do that. And also, this evening we plan to pass an appropriations bill to allow them the funds to do that, as well as to work with FEMA and the transportation to make sure we get our airlines back in line, that we can bring people's lives as much as possible back to normalcy in New York and Virginia.
Mr. Secretary, the American people have gotten very used to what you can only describe as very efficient military operations. Desert Storm had a long buildup, but then it was over in a matter of days with a limited amount of American loss. Kosovo, a war conducted from the air. But when the President says that this war will be the focus of his administration, aren't the American people going to have to be prepared for a long military operation?
Well, I'm sure that this operation, the horrific thing that happened to us this week, took a good deal of planning. We're going to ferret out the perpetrators. It may take time to do it. I think it's the steely will of this nation that we'll move forward and get those things done. And it may take, more than overnight, or it may take more than 2 weeks. But I think it's the American will, and certainly the will of this Congress, and I know the will of the President, to finish this job.
The immediate focus, understandably and obviously, is on recovering as many people as we possibly can, dealing with this great loss, also finding these terrorists and punishing them. But there are economic consequences here as well. At some point in the not-too-distant future, are you going to have to re-examine the tax cut and a lot of the domestic programs, put them on hold?
Tom, one of the things we need to do right away is to look at the ability of our airlines to be able to fly. They've lost a great deal of revenue. They really kind of run on a cash basis, and we need to make sure that that part of our economy is in place and that we don't lose that. We also have to look at the markets and give the stimulus to our markets and do the things that it's important to be able to make sure that our markets and people who are very vitally involved in our economic system have the wherewithal and have the incentive to invest in this country and make this economy grow.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, Dennis Hastert of Illinois, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
New York City tonight is a city of empty streets, empty restaurants, and empty beds, the beds of those people who never came home from work on Tuesday. But this town, despite everything, is not empty of hope. And it is hope that is sustaining the loved ones of those missing victims in their desperate search for some answers in the streets of New York. More on that story now from Dateline's Edie Magnus.
The city is beginning to dig itself out, and a terrible truth is emerging too. The chances that loved ones missing since the attacks will be found are getting slimmer. It is one of many cruel twists to this tragedy that the chaos of those first 24 hours offered more hope that relatives, neighbors, or co-workers might be found. But now, it is day 3. What to do? Where to go? Jennifer Marvison finally left her home today. She's been too shocked and depressed until now, she tells us, to look for her fiancé, Keith Broomfeld.
This is the first I was able to face the world. I haven't been out. So this is the day that I'm going to find out, do or die, whatever it is I have to find out.
Jennifer's come to Bellevue Hospital to post a homemade flyer with Keith's picture on it here on what's called a wall of prayers. It has sprung up and, like a plant watered with tears, is growing steadily, covered with the pictures of missing people. Against a backdrop of spectacular blue skies and balmy weather, scores of people, emotional refugees, are wandering the city, looking, hoping, wondering what to do next about the ones they love but cannot find. Sean Fagan, 34, a trader on the 93rd floor of Tower 1, somewhere above where the first plane hit. His sister, Anne-Marie, says there's been no word of him since that blast. She hit the streets this morning armed with 400 flyers and has been asking questions everywhere.
So you've been to the armory, the morgue?
No.
You have not gone to the morgue yet?
No.
Why not?
I'm hoping that my brother's not there.
What keeps you going?
Like, the alternative isn't, it's not an option that my brother's not okay, and until someone tells me he's not, then he is.
Countless others are feeling the same way, unable to let go of the possibility that their loved ones may be out there somewhere. So they're out too, posting pictures on phone booths, mailboxes, at the entrance of buildings. And after all, more survivors were rescued from the bloody rubble of the Twin Towers today. Maybe the answers are on this list. It's been pulled from the internet. Its accuracy is unknown. But it claims to contain information on the condition of many victims of the plane attacks.
Please don't give up on me.
This woman says she actually did find out her missing brother is alive by seeing his name on this list.
He's injured, but we found him.
Lorraine Browse has also been given a grain of hope. She's learned from the company on the 95th floor where her stepmother worked that someone had sighted her. Lorraine doesn't know exactly what that means. Could her stepmother still be alive, unconscious in a hospital? Or is it false information?
No, they don't have any specific information. All they had was her name on a list. It was very vague. It didn't really tell us much, but at least we know if she was alive, if she had survived, she has to be in a hospital someplace.
Lorraine was told to go to a downtown university to check a list of hospitalized victims.
I know it's going to take a miracle if she's alive. She was so high up in the building. We know she went in early that morning because she had gone to vote beforehand.
As she waits, she takes her place on a line among many others. The crowd, a sobering reminder of how widespread the suffering is. Finally, she gets a look.
Nothing.
No information?
They have partial hospital lists. She wasn't on any of the lists. Something else we can do now.
Except wait and worry and pray that soon they will get an answer. Until then, they will have to keep looking here in this city of lost and found.
Do you still have hope that you'll find him?
Yeah, I hope that I find him. I have to find my brother either way. But we will find my brother one way or the other.
You are watching NBC News coverage of Attack on America. And now, Tom Brokaw.
The investigation has led to Florida, and that's where NBC's Kerry Sanders tonight is in Coral Gables, Florida. He has been tracking at least 2 of these hijacking suspects as they move from pilot training site to pilot training site. Kerry?
Well, Tom, I've been able to obtain the visa for one of these suicide flight pilots, Muhammad Atta. Now, he came into the United States on a tourist visa, and he should not even have been allowed into the United States on that tourist visa under immigration regulations because he was suspected in a terrorist bombing in Israel in 1986. 23-year-old Marwan al-Shahi, one of the suspected suicide pilots, hiding in plain view on Florida's Gulf Coast for more than 7 months, living with 33-year-old Muhammad Atta, another suspected suicide pilot. After both earned their commercial flight ratings on this twin-engine plane, NBC News has learned they came to Miami,
paying $1,500 in cash to sit at the controls of a Boeing 727 flight simulator, similar to this one. Henry George, the instructor, telling the FBI the duo spent about 6 hours at the controls.
I feel violated, raped, whatever. Here I have a skill that I'm very proud of, that I think we're good at, passing on to other pilots wanting to become competent pilots. And here we provided that kind of expertise to the lowest of mankind.
FBI agents also looking at a Microsoft Flight Simulator program. You can buy it for $70 at any computer store. For $30 more, you can add the simulated cockpit of an American Airlines 757, similar to the jet that hit Tower 1. Today's Show travel editor Peter Greenberg says the programs are popular.
A lot of pilots and non-pilots buy these simulators to either train or to actually just have fun, to see what they can do with it, like fly under the Golden Gate Bridge or even fly around or sometimes into like the John Hancock building in Chicago as a game. Nothing they would ever contemplate doing in real life.
But the instruction manual gives you plenty of information you would need if you wanted to fly into any landmark around the world. Just look up the World Trade Center, for instance, and find its coordinates. We asked a licensed pilot in our office to take the controls and fly down the west side of Manhattan. He had little difficulty taking it right on into Tower 1. Only a simulation, but chilling.
You might actually be able to do a practice run just like we did.
Veteran commercial airline pilot Alex Garmendia using the program for the first time today. He says after hours on this software, a novice pilot without experience in a jet would still lack the skills to do much of the controls.
But it surely shows you the cockpit layout.
In FBI custody tonight, Anand Bukhari, a material witness reportedly cooperating with investigators. His Vero Beach home raided by agents. His brother dying in a mid-air collision in Florida while learning to fly here. That accident 1 year ago to the day of the hijackings. The FBI's leads in Florida growing exponentially. FBI agents visiting a strip club in Daytona Beach. Just hours before the hijackings, 3 Middle Eastern men there hinted at the violence to come.
The gentleman actually making the statement, well, America's going to see blood and wait till tomorrow.
Now, the FBI has dispatched FBI agents to Hamburg, Germany tonight. German authorities raided a apartment complex there, an apartment complex where Atta and al-Shahi once lived. And according to German authorities, that's a location that is a known safe house for members and agents of Osama bin Laden. Tom?
Thank you very much. NBC's Kerry Sanders continuing his first-rate detective work for us tonight in the state of Florida. And joining us now is Robert Hager, who is part of NBC's Terrorism Task Force. Bob has been keeping track of the aviation component of all of this. Bob?
The airports in the New York area are still closed, both to departing flights and incoming flights, after one person was arrested and 5 or 6 others have now been detained at JFK Airport and at other New York area airports. The man that was arrested for going, by the way, before I go on with that, let's look at that. That's the computer system that tracks flights in the air in this country right now. And you can see it looks pretty crowded, but if you saw what that looks like on a normal day, it's almost solid green. So this really represents just a fraction of what normal traffic is, but it does show that there are planes back in the air at this point. Going back to those arrests and detainments in New York, one man was arrested for trying to go through security with a forged pilot's license and other forged documents. Then 5 or 6 others detained at JFK and other New York area airports, some of those Arab nationals for other reasons, but detained seriously enough to be questioned by FBI agents and the Terrorism Task Force. So those airports are still closed. Meanwhile, it's been a rocky start at other places in the country to this resumption of flying. LaGuardia Terminal, exclusive of these arrests and tonight's development, had been closed very briefly earlier in the day.
for what turned out to be a false report of a bomb threat. And then the terminal at Orlando, Florida was closed briefly for the same reason, an untrue claim of a bomb threat there in Orlando. The airlines, United, Continental, not flying at all tonight. Delta, American, TWA have limited service, but that's it. So it's starting up slowly. And the security at airports everywhere has been heavy. Uniform patrols beefed up. We have agents from the Marshal Service and Customs and Border Patrol all in uniform at airports. And there's still no mail being allowed on passenger planes. And I'm wondering if that's a general aviation plane, maybe file, but I think not. I think that was a commuter flight. But general aviation is still barred from flights. We're expecting to hear something about that later on tonight. Tom?
Thank you very much, Robert. For the uninitiated, general aviation means private airplanes, the charters and others that fly, and that's an increasingly large part, obviously, of American air traffic. And joining us now is the veteran journalist Mark Clayton of the Christian Science Monitor with new information from air traffic controllers who say that they have intimate knowledge about what happened during the hijacking. You're one of the very few people who has spoken with any of these air traffic controllers. What did they tell you about what they heard from these planes that were involved?
Well, Tom, they told us several things. One thing is they told us the first indications that the flight was in trouble. They told us some of the technical issues that apparently the hijackers were adept at manipulating in the plane. And they also told us a third item, that is that the pilot apparently was flying the plane at least 10 minutes past the point at which it turned toward New York.
And what flight was that? Was that American Flight 11?
Yes, this is American Flight 11, departed Boston about 8 o'clock in the morning. And over western Massachusetts at about 29,000 feet, controllers told me that they gave a signal, they radioed the cockpit and said to rise to 31,000 feet to avoid other air traffic, but nothing happened. That was the first indication something was wrong. They tried to, this is not that unusual, sometimes radio contact is lost, so they tried the frequency several times. American, are you there? Do you copy? But there was no answer. They tried the emergency frequency also. Finally, they realized that right at that point, the transponder on the aircraft quit sending a radar signal back and also quit sending an altitude signal back. But the significance of that, in retrospect, to these controllers was that the hijackers knew that the transponder also was able to send a 4-digit code that would alert authorities to the fact the flight had been hijacked. So they believe now that the hijackers were technically adept enough to know to turn that off.
And did they see the flight make this sharp left-hand turn and head toward New York? And did they alert anyone in the New York area?
What happened was they did not know it was a hijacking. They still thought it was a technical, perhaps an electrical problem with the transponder, until suddenly in their earphones they hear a heavily accented voice saying, don't do anything foolish, no one will get hurt. At that instant, the controllers told me they knew immediately they had a hijack situation. Also at that instant, the plane began its turn south toward New York.
And who did they alert in the New York area that there was a hijacking underway? Anyone?
One of the controllers I talked to, who was not fully aware of what steps were taken in response, other than that supervisors and others were responding, says that he believed that 2 F-15 jets from Otis Air Force Base were scrambled, but he was not sure if those jets got off the ground in time. I called Otis Air Force Base today following up on this detail, and they were unwilling to give any information about their operations out. They're under the command of NORAD, I have not yet contacted NORAD, but I'm told that they wouldn't do anything unless NORAD contacted them. But they are responsible for, the FAA controller said that it's standard procedure in a hijack situation to alert authorities and to scramble jets.
What about the state of the mind of these air traffic controllers who were monitoring all of this now 3 days after the incident?
Well, it was a pretty rough time for them, but especially for the individual who was doing the controlling, doing the handling of the aircraft. I have to tell you, I did not speak with that individual. The individuals I spoke with, however, were intimately familiar with all that transpired in that room, and they know that that controller lived, as I was told, he lived the situation. He was hearing the whole thing through his headphones. One of the most significant things he heard, and one of the reasons we know that the pilot probably was the one flying the plane, is that the pilot repeatedly pushed a push-to-talk button, a special feature that allows every sound in the cockpit to be heard. And he did this repeatedly throughout at least 10 minutes of the flight south.
So there is a record of that at some point, we hope.
Well, that's exactly right. One of the things the controllers pointed out to me is that if the terrorists were adept enough technically to switch off the transponder, it is possible that they might have disabled the the cockpit voice recorder by pulling the fuse box out, or pulling the fuse out of the fuse box. Apparently that can be done, they believed, and so they think that this taped record may be the only record if the box is even found.
All right, thanks very much. Mark Clayton of the Christian Science Monitor, who has been interviewing air traffic controllers who had intimate knowledge of what was going on American Airlines Flight 11 out of Boston. That was the first one to go into Tower 1 at the World Trade Center. A chilling scenario that played out in the skies over the Atlantic seaboard, and it was only the beginning. Joining us now is New York's Governor George Pataki, who has been at the side of New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani for virtually every hour here during the 3 days of this crisis in New York's largest city, the most vibrant city in the world for that matter. Governor Pataki, let me talk to you first of all about the death toll. Earlier today, the mayor told us that it would be that they now have some 4,700 people listed as missing. Is it possible that that number could go higher?
Well, we're hopeful, Tom, that that number might go lower. People that are missing will turn up. We'll find that they've been double counted. And we're still making the priority the search and rescue operation in the hopes that perhaps someone can still be found alive down at the site. So we don't want to talk about numbers. We just want to talk about people and do everything we can to try to help them as much as possible.
Governor, give me a location on where you are right now, just so we can orient our viewers to where you are.
I'm in front of the State Armory that's been utilized as a family assistance center where families, relatives, friends of those who are missing can come and get the best possible information. And Tom, you know, there's incredible grief, but there's also people out there who have volunteered since the beginning. There's a tremendous outpouring of support, and I think the families understand that the people of New York and the people of America are standing shoulder to shoulder with them.
Governor, these people also deserve some honest answers. There are hundreds of thousands of tons of rubble down there. Much of it is dangerous and unstable. The other part of it is deeply compacted. It's going to take a long time, isn't it, to get through all of that?
It certainly is, Tom, and I don't, no one can minimize the magnitude of this disaster and catastrophe. We right now have brave firefighters, Port Authority police who lost many of their colleagues and the leadership of the port down there trying to go through that wreckage as carefully as possible, and the hope, however slim it might be, that perhaps a miracle can occur. And we will not lose hope. We will stand with the families, we will stand with the people of America, and we'll get through this.
And Governor, let me just ask you how you arrived at that estimate of those who are missing. Did you reconcile the numbers the various companies had and the state agencies had in the building with the people who have turned up?
Yeah, Tom, it's very hard to be sure of the numbers or the names because we have had to put together lists of people who were working there, compare them with the lists of those who whether the employer or we have found are out alive or perhaps in a hospital. So we're continuing to try to compile the best possible information and certainly to get it to the families, to those who are waiting that word.
As you know, New Yorkers take great pride in the freedom that they have in the city. Are some of those freedoms going to be suppressed now as there is greater security?
Tom, we're not going to let the freedom of New York or the freedom of America be subjected to this terrorist attack. I was out yesterday on the streets seeing thousands of people lined up to give blood. They're not frightened out of the streets. They're not frightened out of their homes. The people of New York, the people of America, don't scare easy. This has been a horrible black day, but we will get through this. We will preserve our freedoms, and New York and America will be stronger as we go forward.
All right, thank you very much. New York Governor George Pataki, who had an extended conversation earlier today, as we saw, with President George W. Bush, who is expected to come to New York tomorrow after a national memorial service, a day of remembrance at noon Eastern time, and of course we'll have coverage of that as well. Let's go back now to NBC's David Bloom in Lower Manhattan and check in on the rescue and recovery efforts that are underway. David?
Well, Tom, as you and Governor Pataki alluded to, those rescue operations continuing tonight, now some 60 hours after the first explosion. Show you a live picture right now of the rescue workers, the firefighters, the police officers, the other emergency personnel still laboring, some running bucket brigades to try to get the debris out, others using blow torches to try to, that's mostly steel workers, to try to get at the debris, to get underneath the debris. But it's worth mentioning that, to the best of our knowledge, the only people pulled out of the wreckage today, 3 New York City firefighters, were actually individuals who became trapped today when debris shifted, when buildings partially collapsed. But the last person that we know of who was rescued, actually having been involved in Tuesday's attacks, was found yesterday. And as you alluded to again, Tom, it's easy to see why hope might begin to fade. You recall that in the Oklahoma City bombing, it was only in the first 24 hours where victims were found alive. After that, any individual found was dead. And again, in this situation, we had 5 victims, 2 coming out the first day, 3 the second day, none tonight. And yet, Tom, it's amazing the effort that these rescue workers are engaged in. As I said the last time we were on the air, it's now been a little over an hour ago when the horns blasted here and these rescue workers literally took off, running literally for their lives because they don't know when the next collapse might come. And I might tell you, Tom, that some of these emergency workers are now writing on their arms and on their legs their names, their social security numbers, so that if something awful should happen and they should become trapped, people might know who they were. Tom?
That is a haunting thought. Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom, who has been on duty almost from the beginning in Lower Manhattan, not too far from the World Trade Center. Well, put yourself in this picture. A mass of people fleeing from what must seem for a moment like the end of the world, and your job is to go the other way, to rush toward the site of all that destruction. Hundreds of New York's firefighters and police officers did just that on Tuesday. They did it bravely and well, and many of them lost their lives. Here's Dateline's Dawn Fratangelo.
They are not blood relatives, but without a doubt, they are family. Firefighters in New York, grappling with what has become of their band of brothers and sisters. There's Engine 54 on 48th Street in Manhattan. The pride of Midtown, it's known as. 14 members were on duty Tuesday. 14 have not yet returned.
We haven't lost anybody yet. We're missing 14 members from this house. 14 brothers went, 6 from each company and 2 from the battalion. We have not found or heard from them. We're still hoping that they're alive, and we're just waiting. It's just a tragedy, just waiting.
Waiting's the toughest. So too is resting. But that's what will give them energy to get back to the rubble, to search. Lieutenant Bob Jackson is anxious to find his buddy, Captain Dave Woolley, a 30-year veteran.
Dave was a good guy, good tease. He knew how to twist my, push a button to get me going, and then he'd turn around and smile at me. He took me under his wing, just, teaching me stuff.
This whiteboard is usually used by the firehouse to assign seating on a fire truck. This list of names, now a stark reminder of the truck that didn't return. And they don't even want to think about them not returning, hoping their missing friends will be rescued. And today there was good reason to think so. Several firefighters have been found alive among the rubble. Incredibly, 3 of them were able to walk out of the wreckage. But those kinds of discoveries have been the exception.
We're very tight here. Everybody's very close. You know everybody in the firehouse. You know their wives. You know their kids. You lose a friend.
Lieutenant Mark Munley, a 16-year veteran, grief-stricken about the 10 missing members of his firehouse on 51st Street in Midtown Manhattan.
Everybody who did get called down there from this house is missing.
Half the men from the firehouse responded to the World Trade Center. The other half could not.
They were trying to be sent there, calling dispatcher, asking us to send us there, and they couldn't get through to dispatcher, and the guys feel strange.
Lieutenant Munley and his fellow members of Engine 8 now wrestle with guilt. Why couldn't they get there?
You want to be available. You want to go to where the action is. You want to help people. That's what we do. You don't shy away from that stuff. No one ever thinks that this is going to happen, that this is going to be a disaster.
Even so, he knows what the outcome likely would have been.
You know that if you could have been there, you would have been there, and something terrible could have happened.
It's been 2.5 days now, and it's not getting any easier at Lieutenant Munley's firehouse.
They're all close. We're all close. I mean, Captain Mills, Captain Latitude, Chief Pierre, we're close to them all.
There's an empty space now in the row of hanging jackets where the missing firefighters' jackets would have been. An emptiness that's being experienced at firehouses throughout the city. A board with wishes of gratitude now lines this firehouse wall as residents try to thank these men with kindness and charity. Engine Company 6 is nicknamed the Tammany Hall Tigers, originally a volunteer squad founded by New York's Boss Tweed. It's housed in a 100-year-old building where the tradition continues that a firefighter never leaves behind one of their colleagues. The night shift was just going off duty when the call came in around 9 a.m. They did what other firefighters would do. They joined the day shift and went out on the job. Jumping on the back of the engine truck, 33-year-old Tommy Houlihan, a 6-year veteran.
I'm staying till there's 4 guys from 6 Engine who are missing, and I'm not leaving till they find them.
Tommy Houlihan was among the 4 firefighters from Engine Company 6 who disappeared in the smoke and rubble. Timothy Dowling was the commanding officer at Engine 6 until 1993, when he was injured in the first World Trade Center bombing and forced to retire. But he had to come back to Engine 6.
After all the excitement of Tuesday, I couldn't stay at home. My nephew is assigned to this firehouse, and he's among the missing firefighters. So the only place I could be, in reality, was here with all my firefighters that I've known for the last 12 years.
Tommy Houlihan is the nephew of retired Captain Dowling. Like many firefighters, it's in the family blood. Tommy's grandfather was a battalion commander who died on the job.
His mother is really, it's devastating. She had lost her father, and now she's losing her son. We hope not.
A list on this chalkboard shows the names of the men who went out on that job that morning, including Tommy Houlihan. Next to it, a map, a sketch of where Engine 6 had parked in front of the World Trade Center. The firehouse is not its usual ordered self now. Bunker gear is thrown around, some is missing, borrowed by visiting firemen. The kitchen isn't working, nor is there power. But last night, some women came by with hot food, and the men decided it was time to break bread together.
The church of the Pompeii over in Greenwich Village came by. They dropped off food. The people of the city are just incredible.
Meanwhile, the search for Tommy Houlihan and the other 3 men from Engine Company 6 goes on. A family A band of brothers and sisters, now broken.
Daylines dawn for Tangelo tonight on the firefighters of the city, and already there is an effort underway to raise a fund for the orphans and the widows of those firemen and policemen who have been lost in this rescue effort. It's a little after 9 Eastern Time now on the third day of this war on terrorism. We have an update on the latest developments tonight. New York police say that 7 people have been detained at New York City airports for questioning about the hijacking and as a result of that questioning, all 3 major airports in the New York City area now have been closed. Government sources say there is now overwhelming evidence that Osama bin Laden is the mastermind responsible for these terrorist attacks. Investigators have found the black box flight recorder from the plane that was crashed into the ground in Pennsylvania. They've detected a signal from the recorder in the Pentagon crash, they believe. The Pentagon is saying tonight that the United States will launch what is being described as sustained military strikes against those behind these terrorist attacks. Officials say they are considering calling up the military reserves for the first time since the Gulf War. Former President Bill Clinton was in Australia when all of this happened. His wife, of course, is the junior senator from New York. The president was rushed back to the United States, and today NBC News cameras caught up with him for his reaction.
We have to improve our defenses, and we have to let people know that there will be a strong sanction for this. And I believe America, if we stay together, if the people will stay together and keep their spirits strong, I believe the president will find out what happened. I think he'll do the right thing.
This is Former President Bill Clinton tonight, who has just returned from a speaking tour in Australia. NBC's Robert Bazell is at Manhattan's Bellevue Hospital Center, where there have been people being treated, but so many families showing up, hoping that they'll find their loved ones there. Robert?
Yes, Tom, when I came in here just now, by the wall outside with people whose photographs of the missing, some of the doctors and nurses from here at Bellevue, which is one of the most famous hospitals in the world, certainly has the biggest trauma center in New York City, some doctors and nurses were looking at those pictures and just weeping because they feel the same thing that everybody here feels about all these people who are missing and the lack of survivors that we have here. With me is Dr. Eric Mannheim, who's the medical director here at Bellevue. Dr. Mannheim, today you had some people from the rescue site come in, correct?
Yes, we had about a half a dozen firefighters and sanitation workers come in to the emergency.
What kind of injuries are you seeing today?
The kinds of things we're seeing now are predominantly exposure, temperature problems, dehydration, and we're still seeing some crush injuries.
Now, you had a team that went down right after the explosion and did an amazing rescue job on a Port Authority police officer. Tell me that story.
That's correct. There was this Port Authority police officer who was called immediately after the event, who was at 42nd Street, and raced downtown with a bunch of colleagues. He was caught in the immediate collapse of the first tower. He was found later on that day, very fortunately. However, he was pinned. And it took hours and hours to extricate him. We sent a trauma team down thinking that his legs might have to be amputated. Fortunately, they were able to extricate him. However, he had what's called compartment syndrome, where he had such swelling in his lower extremities that there had to be emergency procedures to relieve the pressure. He's currently here in critical condition. His kidneys have failed. However, there's a lot of hope that he'll get kidney function back as a result of that traumatic injury.
Now, you have a lot of other stories like that, dozens and dozens of them in this hospital, right?
Right. There are many, many, many stories. There was a woman, for example, who's 32 years old, who was on the 13th floor, who was found, and she also had multiple trauma, particularly facial injuries and lower extremity injuries. She's going to do fine. She's going to walk out of here in probably a week or two.
And how does that heartening story compare when you see all those pictures on the wall outside of people desperate for their loved ones?
I think for all of us here, it's the one thing that keeps us going. We're very hopeful that there'll be several more people rescued from the site. We're still in the business of taking care of all the workers, anybody that has any kind of injury whatsoever. And I think it's keeping the spirits of the staff up somewhat, though I think we're quite realistic about the enormous tragedy that's occurred downtown.
So, Tom, that's the story here from Bellevue, which has amazing facilities that are standing by to take care of anybody who comes out of the rubble, but unfortunately, that's been very few so far. Tom?
That has been the tragic irony of the medical situation here in New York. almost from the beginning, people standing by, preparing to take care of the people that they thought would overwhelm their facilities, and there have been just too few of them because so many are still trapped in that rubble. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says that just over 4,700 people have been reported missing at this point at the site of the World Trade Center. Some 700 of those missing came from just one company housed in the World Trade Center, 700 out of about 1,000 employees at that one office. Dateline's Bob McEwen has more on that story tonight.
Here and abroad, they were the ultimate symbols of America and American business. The Twin Towers, home to some of the giants of U.S. finance. You may well not know its name, but one of those companies is called Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald dominates the bond market. Last year, the firm did $50 trillion in business. But according to Chairman and CEO Howard Lutnick, what's made him most proud isn't its bottom line, but the kind of company it is.
We are a family. We are the tightest group of people. And we always have been a tight group of people. But you just don't know it. We did know it, but I mean, this last couple of days, I mean, it's unbelievable.
And how long these past few days must have been for Howard Lutnick. In a catastrophe that's crushed an entire country, no one can have been hit harder than he has.
We have lost every single person who was in the office. We don't know of any, not a single one person getting down from the 101st to the 105th floors where our offices were, not a single person.
Incredibly, it was just over 48 hours ago that Cantor Fitzgerald was on top of the financial world and of the World Trade Center. The firm occupied 4 floors high up in the North Tower, from the 101st to the 105th. 1,000 employees, traders and executives, secretaries and support staff went to work there every day. But this Tuesday, CEO Howard Lutnick was going to be late. He didn't want to miss his son's first day in kindergarten.
I mean, I wasn't there because I dropped my baby off at school for my 5-year-old's first day of school, but that means that I get there late. That means I get to be alive. And anybody who got there early doesn't get to. It's unthinkable.
Even without him, the day began as it often does, with a conference call between New York and the office in Los Angeles. At about 8:45, over the speakerphone, Cantor Fitzgerald employees on the West Coast heard someone in New York say, "I think a plane just hit us."
I got a call as I was leaving my son's school that there was, you know, a plane hit the Trade Center. So we went right down at the top of the building, and I saw a lot of smoke, and I knew it was not good. And not good. And all I was saying on the way down is, it's not good. This is not good.
The first jetliner had smashed into the North Tower at about the 90th story, not far below where Cantor Fitzgerald's offices began, on the 101st. An inferno of jet fuel now rampaged upwards, consuming floor after floor.
It's unfathomable that everyone would die. It's not possible. Someone would get out. So all I wanted was to hear one person say they were on 101. Just one person who was on 101. People were coming out of the building, and I'd grab them, and they were sort of like out of it. And I'd take them and say, what floor are you on? And I got all the police around that door, just shake people and say, what floor are you on? And they'd say 50, and I'd scream out there, I got 50, and a 60, and a 70. I got up to 91. Someone said they worked on the 91st floor, and they came down and they got out. And then the building collapsed. And I don't have anybody. I don't have anybody.
With people off on vacation or business trips, and those who simply got to work late, Lutnick now believes everyone who was in the office that day perished. About 700 in all.
There's 700 of my families. I can't say it. 700 of my families. 700. I'm just one, but they were all 700. There's so many of them. They all lost their son or their daughter. People come up to me and say, I only have one daughter. What do? Okay. This is too many. Too many. Too many.
Is there any way to describe what these past few days have been like for you?
They're a blur. They're a blur of crying and hugs, of trying to help people and give them information when there isn't really any positive news to give. To be strong enough to help them. But I'm just another one of them. And it's just the world moving like at a snail's pace. The day just lasts forever, and every minute is extended and young.
And he says every minute of every day has been spent trying to find someone, anyone, who's missing. Cantor Fitzgerald has established a crisis center at New York's Hotel Pierre with grief counselors and a list of those employees who went to work on Tuesday but never went home.
All of the families, they hunt down every lead, they run every place, they go to every hospital with this employee list. I make sure that we go with our list of 700 people and say, find someone on this list. Find me someone on this list. Because someone on this list means that I can call a family and I can tell them that they have a reason to not be sad anymore.
But as of today, they've located only 4 hospitalized Cantor Fitzgerald employees, each of whom was just arriving at the World Trade Center when the attack took place. And as if all the rest of it weren't too much for one person to bear, one of those 700 employees they haven't found is Howard Lutnick's own brother.
My brother Gary. Yeah, he called my sister. And we got lots of people got phone calls. Probably 100 people got phone calls after the plane hit. You know, they called their family, they called their mother, they called their wife and said, you know, we've been hit by a plane and we're evacuating. I mean, that was the common thread. My brother called my sister a little later and he said the smoke was pouring in, there was no way out, and he's not going to make it.
That was just 2 days ago. This morning, after a moment of silence commemorating those who died, the U.S. financial markets started trading bonds again. Howard Lutnick says he asked his surviving employees what they wanted to do. They voted. Then they told him, let's go back to work.
So they lost the person to their left and the person to their right, but they've decided that's what they're going to do. And so this morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, my staff in Europe and here opened the U.S. government securities market, and it's a miracle. These people, I don't know, they're just, they didn't sleep. Since losing all their friends, they didn't sleep once. They decided they wanted to go to work. Why would they want to go to work? But that's what they wanted to do. Certainly not what I asked them to do. And these people are just, these are spectacular people. Spectacular people.
And in return, Cantor Fitzgerald's CEO made a promise to the families of the colleagues and friends who may be gone, but never forgotten.
Within the company that when everything is different. It is everything different. But what it's going to be is we are going to, as a company, we are going to take care of and do everything we can as a different business model to take care of the people, the families that we lost. Because it's not about us. I get to kiss my kid. But now I got people's wives calling me. They don't know what to do. I mean, I had a very young staff. The probably average age was the young 30s. I mean, they all have babies. They had babies. So we had a lot of people to take care of. We have a lot of people to take care of. A lot of people to take care of. And that's what we're going to do. That's what I'm going to do. And that's what my staff is going to do, because that's what we're committed to do.
Dayline's Bob McEwen tonight on one company that lost 700 of its 1,000 employees at the World Trade Center. We want to talk now in the next few moments about presidential leadership, senatorial leadership, private leadership in this country, the leadership of this culture during this time of grave crisis. And joining from Washington now is our Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert. The president can look out across the land and see America lined up solidly behind him, Tim.
Tom, it's unbelievable. 90% of the American people saying they want a military strike, 80% giving George Bush positive job ratings. The leaders of the House and the Senate, Democrat and Republican, united behind him. Tom, listen to this. The administration had asked for $20 billion in aid to help New York City and to begin to prepare a military operation to root out terrorism. The Senate tonight is going to vote for $40 billion, $20 billion for New York and $20 billion on the war effort. Remember the Persian Gulf War back in 1991? The entire cost of that operation was $60 billion. This Congress, this president is determined to send the message tonight that this is a dead serious business, and whoever did this is going to pay a price with a massive and, in the words of one official, disproportionate retaliation.
Tim, I think we're still trying to come to grips with what the future may look like. The president said today that this war will be the focus of his administration, and then added almost as an afterthought, I'll still deal with the domestic business. But House Speaker Dennis Staster told me tonight, when he was talking about the new shape of the American economy, it sounded like he was saying that Congress may have to provide some financial assistance to America's commercial airlines and other entities as well.
Absolutely, Tom. The president had always said that he wouldn't use the Social Security Trust Fund except in war or recession. It appears we have both. It's going to be a very expensive enterprise. There was a huge economic shock, the result of what happened at New York City at the World Trade Center. Insurance companies are going to have liability of $15 to $20 billion. And the huge economic loss, and as you mentioned, the airline revenues. But Tom, it's fascinating to me, there is no one complaining. No one suggesting it shouldn't be done. And there's no one in the Congress right now saying, what about our intelligence failure? People are saying, let's get people out of the ground. Let's heal ourselves. Let's deal with our dead and our wounded and try to help families cope before we start pointing fingers. And let's rally around and identify a common enemy. The other thing, Tom, that's most striking to me is we keep talking about return to normalcy, but it's going to have to be redefined and changed, and we all know it. It seems this fine line between security and freedom is going to be redefined as well. And the more security we see, the more insecure we're going to feel, starting at airports.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Tim Russert tonight. This, after all, is not a pauper nation. We were just emerging from a Great Depression when World War II broke out. And in fact, this president, this administration may have to go back to some kind of form of war bonds that were so popular during that time because every citizen who bought a war bond felt that they were making an extra contribution. It is safe to say that President George W. Bush is facing the greatest test of his character and leadership ability in his young presidency. How well is he doing at this point? Here's Dateline's Josh Mankiewicz.
And I am confident there will be universal approval of the actions this government takes.
And right now, at least, Mr. Bush is correct. Public opinion polling shows widespread support for a president heading into the biggest test of leadership any chief executive has faced since World War II. It would be a titanic task for any president. At once, comfort a stunned nation, rally international support, pursue and find the terrorists, correct an astonishing failure of U.S. intelligence, and on an almost daily basis, send unmistakable signals to more than 270 million Americans that he has both hands firmly on the wheel.
Crisis brings out either the best or the worst in a leader.
Dr. Michael Genovese of Loyola Marymount University has written extensively about presidential power and leadership.
Jimmy Carter faced the crisis of the Iran hostage situation and seemed to get smaller and smaller as the months went by. Other presidents, Lincoln, for example, face a crisis and seem to get bigger and bigger.
Presidents Reagan and Clinton also seem to rise to the occasion in difficult times. Mr. Reagan after the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and Bill Clinton after the terrorist attack in Oklahoma City.
We cannot let terrorists and rogue nations hold this nation hostile or hold...
But even his strongest supporters would admit that George W. Bush is not in the same league as Presidents Reagan or Clinton when it comes to public speaking. And in a culture of television, talking to a country that's ready for some inspiration, it's a handicap Mr. Bush and the team around him will have to overcome.
He's seen the way other presidents like Reagan and Clinton handle the great rhetorical moment, and he knows he doesn't have that skill. And what he tries to project instead is a kind of steadiness.
Lawrence O'Donnell is the senior political analyst for MSNBC. He says Mr. Bush is going to have to change his style from CEO to frontman, especially if the president's war against terrorism turns bloody.
So he has to sort of be the official spokesman for this war. He can't leave that to others.
He can't delegate it. He has to be out there explaining in order to preserve the support, in order to keep the country behind him. He needs to have a more inclusive conversation with the American public on an ongoing basis than he ever anticipated having as a president on any subject.
But the horror in New York makes one part of the president's job easier. Until now, our response to terrorism has been primarily technological because of the belief that Americans wouldn't support a war that produced U.S. casualties. But all that changed Tuesday morning.
This is a country that does not so much need to be led, but simply told what the marching orders are.
What would make you the best candidate in office during the Middle East crisis?
I've been a leader. I've been a person who has to set a clear vision and convince people to follow.
During the 2000 presidential campaign, Mr. Bush sold himself as a proven leader. But his foreign policy experience has been limited mostly to some on-the-job training.
Right. Good evening, everyone.
However, Americans do have plenty of confidence in the team around Mr. Bush. And as a country, we're clearly ready to let a new president lead us on a crusade against an enemy with no fixed borders and no home address.
If history's a guide, how long is this tremendous support for President Bush likely to last?
Historically, presidents in a crisis get a rally around the flag effect where they get a boost in their popularity and increased support. It doesn't last a real long time. It can last several months at the outset. And the next step is, what does the president do with this blip in support, with this increased support?
The national pressure to take swift, decisive action may be overwhelming, but it's taking the right action that's a true test of leadership. And so the next few months will be a test not only for the president, but for the people he governs as well.
That's Dateline's Josh Makowitz on President Clinton. Pardon me, on President Bush. I have Clinton on my mind because it's been almost 40 years since we heard from, well, we're going to talk first of all about Robert McNamara and the role that he played in another presidency, John F. Kennedy facing his own test of character. It was October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then the fate of the world hung in the balance. The former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara joins us tonight from Washington. We do have Mrs. Clinton coming up in just a few moments, Secretary McNamara, so that's why I was throwing all of those names into the mix. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
I'm delighted to be with you, Tom.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis, I know one of the considerations was in the table that you were trying to make those decisions. There was a lot of rage, understandably. There's a lot of passion about doing something massively, militarily, almost from the beginning. Is there a lesson to be drawn from the Bush administration from all of that?
Well, I think there is. And the first lesson is to take time to decide what the problem is you're facing and what the alternative ways of dealing with it are, and then to mobilize the nation and its allies to follow the best course. I think our president is doing that today. We have to do three things simultaneously. One, initiate Reconstruction. The Congress tonight is going to be dealing with part of that. Number two, develop a plan to destroy the attackers, the terrorists, and those who harbored them. Identify them first and then destroy them. We're well on the way to that, and it's important that it be done in association with our allies. NATO obviously is among those. Yesterday, for the first time in the history of NATO, since it was started after World War II, essentially 55 years ago, under Article 5, agreed that an attack on one is an attack on all, and they will support us against the terrorists. And then thirdly, and we haven't talked much about this, we must begin to identify the fundamental issues that stimulate terrorists to do what they're doing, and in particular, stimulate nations to support them. The Afghans, but several other nations I won't name tonight. We must address those issues as well.
Mr. McNamara, you have written extensively and painfully about the mistakes that you made as a principal architect of America's tragic Vietnam policies. What are the lessons for this administration during this time from your experience?
Well, one of the things we didn't do, and the North Vietnamese didn't do, was try to understand their enemy. And we didn't understand them, and they didn't understand us, and that prolonged the war. In this case, we must try to understand what lay behind the terrorist actions. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting we should sympathize with them. My God, no. But we must understand them, and in particular, we must understand why nations are supporting them and begin to lay the foundation for changing the attitudes of those nations in the years that lie ahead, so we don't have a continuing foundation for terrorism such as this.
What about the role of hubris in decision-making? We have a large, powerful, technologically efficient nation going against what a lot of people believe is just a small band of willful people, but that too can get us in danger, can it?
It can indeed. We are the most powerful nation in the world economically, politically, and militarily. We're going to have great difficulty finding how to use our military power effectively here. But I'm very confident that the leaders we have, the Cheneys, Rumsfelds, and Powells, along with the President, will do that.
All right, former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, who joins us tonight. He was at the table during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and of course he has written extensively about his experience in Vietnam. And joining us now is NBC's Robert Hager, who has the latest on the chaos in the air traffic system in this country.
And it's
Bob?
off to a really rough start today, Tom, on this first day of what was supposed to be open skies. Northwest Airlines has now said, after trying to operate, that it's going to shut down for the rest of the night because it had some phone call and said it was not prudent to operate. Doesn't tell more than that. Let's take a look. That was the tracker that was up there on the screen briefly. There you see traffic in the northeast, and believe me, although that probably looks like a lot of planes, it's nothing compared to what traffic normally is. There it pans down the east coast and across into the nation's heartland and down south with a lot of activity. Well, not really a lot of activity, but planes going in and out of Atlanta and panning across. There's the view with Texas, and you see them centered around Dallas-Fort Worth there, and continuing across to California now over the Rocky Mountains, so scattered traffic up around Denver. And there's the West Coast view, little traffic around San Francisco in the Bay Area, and there's the whole nation. Believe me, that's solid green on a normal night this time of evening, with 3,000 to 4,000 planes in the air at any one given time, and there's just a tiny fraction of that in the air right now. Well then, besides Northwest's decision after starting up briefly to close down completely, and again it was because they had some phone call and simply said that it was not prudent to operate, Boston's Logan Airport is going to remain closed indefinitely because the FAA won't let it open. The FAA saying that Logan still needs to show that it has a lot more stricter security in effect. Logan, of course, the origination for 2 of those hijacked flights. And then the New York airports, which have been closed down by police activity, arrests in New York of, well, arrest of 1 and 5 or 6 others detained, the 1 arrested with false pilot's documents. And so now the FAA says they're going to leave the New York airports closed for the rest of tonight and reassess in the morning, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager tonight on the continuing chaos in America's skies. New Yorkers, of course, are known for their ability to cope in a crisis. After all, just getting through a normal day here can be tough enough. But New Yorkers caught in a real catastrophe can call on reserves and strength and stamina that are nothing short of astonishing and inspiring. Tonight, Hoda Kotb has the story of a woman whose compassion and courage are above and beyond what has become the norm in these exceptional days.
I've always known that I have had a knack for being able to connect with people and a desire to kind of help humanity in some way. I had to use my talent and my knowledge to try and make a difference in this horrible tragedy.
On Tuesday morning, like thousands of other doctors, nurses, and medics who heeded the call to help the victims of the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, Nurse Teresa Thomas put on her scrubs and got to work.
I knew there may be limited time to get the supplies we needed if that someone should come through the door. We were ready.
But unlike the other people at this triage center, for Teresa, the work was personal.
I can imagine, though, that every time a victim walked in, or every time a stretcher came by, your mind had to be on just one person.
It was. I was searching for him.
Searching for Brian Novotny, her fiancé, a credit broker unlucky enough to have an office on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center.
You'll see maybe a a haircut or a shirt. Sorry. I'm sorry. So, yeah, you know, you're hoping that that really might be him.
For Teresa, it would be a day of waiting, searching, and hoping that Brian would emerge from the rubble. In effect, she would have to become two separate people that day. The devoted fiancé keeping hope alive that he would be okay, and the ultimate professional, a medic at the top of her game and ready for anything. For Teresa, that day started like so many before. The morning paper, a cup of coffee, but this time, a goodbye she would not forget.
He gave me a kiss on the cheek. And he always waved at the door. And he waved, you know, I'll see you later.
As usual, Brian headed to the World Trade Center. Teresa was off to the hospital. But then, just after 9 in the morning, she heard the news. A plane had hit the World Trade Center, Brian's tower, just 14 floors below his office.
So I immediately ran back to my phone and attempted to dial.
But no one answered. She had no idea where Brian was. Then suddenly, she got word that his sister did get through to him on his cell phone. The news was bittersweet. Brian was alive, but trapped.
There was a kind of a sense of relief that she had actually spoken with him, and I was hopeful. If anyone was going to be okay, it was going to be him.
Even after the towers collapsed, she held out hope.
And then I started to think about you know, to try and get some control.
So, and the way to get control for you was to do what?
Was to try and help people.
She made her way to a triage center across town and waited for the wounded to arrive. But minutes passed, then hours, and few survivors appeared.
It must have been frustrating, I would imagine. You're waiting to help. You have everything there. Just bring us somebody.
We wanted somebody.
You, as a nurse, you had to stay focused.
I had to stay focused.
You had to keep your mind exactly on the task at hand.
That's right.
What were you afraid would happen if you didn't?
I think I'm afraid that I won't find that my hope will go away.
Before long, victims began to trickle in, and incredibly, despite her own fears about what might have happened to her fiancé, Teresa continued to work. Finally, after 14 hours, she went home. But after a sleepless night, she was back on the job, helping whomever she could.
You put those scrubs back on, grabbed your stethoscope, and went back to work. Not a lot of people could have done that.
I think I'm a fighter that way. I think that all of us are stronger than we realize. And when I put my scrubs back on, it empowers me.
Again, she went to the triage center. Again, she waited. Again, no sign of Brian.
Are you going on fumes?
I think so.
But yet you keep going back to help.
I'll just keep going back until, you know, I don't know. I really don't know when, but I'll keep going back.
Today, Teresa's taking time to tend to her own wounds, combing hospitals and rescue centers for news, even setting up an email address, briancomehome@yahoo.com, for anyone who might have seen him in the days since the terrorist attack.
We're going to try and get his picture anywhere we can show it. We're going to try and get more information.
She's also reflecting on the life they've been hoping to build, a new home, a dog, a wedding in June. Finally, she's finding strength in the memory of an evening they shared the night before the terrorist attack.
And he was going to go to sleep, and I said, for some reason, you know, Brian, can you just stay up and can we just talk for a while before you go to sleep? And he said, sure. That's when we started talking about our future and how much we loved each other, and we're so happy.
Just really hang on to that moment now.
I hang on to it. And I remember that when we were laying there, he was talking and I was looking at him, and I touched his face. and he was hugging me. He's the love of my life.
Buildings will go back up again and the economy will recover, but there are some losses that are simply irreplaceable. Let's go back now to NBC's David Bloom, who's in Lower Manhattan, and he's monitoring the rescue and recovery operations at the World Trade Center. David?
Well, Tom, I missed the third night of this rescue and recovery operation. We're getting used to some of the rhythms and patterns. This is the time of night where we see a lot of the emergency workers coming and going. Some of the firefighters and police officers are working 24-hour on, 24-off shifts. But most of the other emergency workers are volunteers. They come in early in the day, they leave late at night. One of them is joining me now, Dr. Emil Chin. He's an ophthalmologist. You've seen, especially in the last couple days, a lot of eye injuries, a lot of other injuries to the rescue workers. Describe what you're seeing in there.
Today we had a couple of rescue workers with crush injuries that we pulled out. The 2 days beforehand there were more survivors, but right now, even though we're hopeful and we have false alarms probably every 5 or 10 minutes where somebody blows a whistle and the whole site's got to be quiet, and they follow in with the dogs, I haven't seen anybody pulled out alive from the original wreckage.
Well, in fact, there were 2 people pulled out on Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, none to the best of our knowledge today. And yet, as you just said, there are moments where all of you, and there are thousands of you inside there, perhaps we could take a live picture right now showing what that scene looks like even at this hour. But there are moments when you're asked to stop and be as quiet as you can under the circumstances. Explain that.
Well, obviously it's hard because you can hear the machinery behind us. There's a lot of earth-moving equipment, and they're doing some high-powered cutting with acetylene torches. But every so often they'll blow a whistle, and that'll be the command for everybody to be quiet. They're listening for people tapping or speaking. And then typically afterwards, they'll ask for a particular piece of equipment. And we can tell if it's a hopeful sign or not so hopeful. Sometimes they ask for oxygen, which is a very hopeful sign, or maybe a stretcher, and then the medical staff is ecstatic. Other times, unfortunately, too frequently, they'll ask for a body bag or something like that.
I know there's some supplies that you're running short of, others that you simply don't have. Tell us what you need, keeping in mind that you're speaking to a national audience here.
I would say right now we need some more oxygen tanks that are full. That would be for the local people. And for the national people, I know a lot of volunteers want to help. We don't have the right kind of masks on site. Most of the rescue workers and physicians and nurses, we're kind of making do with these type of masks for particulate matter, but there's supposed to be asbestos in the air. The EPA said that, and we would need probably 1,000 or 2,000 asbestos masks, and they could deliver them to medical triage at 1 Liberty Plaza.
Dr. Emil Chin, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Get some rest, and I'm sure we'll see you back here tomorrow. Tom, I want to show you 2 pieces of tape before we go here, one of which we talked about earlier, happened a couple hours ago now, and you can see what happens when the emergency evacuation horn blows and these rescue workers literally take off running for their lives. We've been talking for the last couple days about how there's still a great deal of danger from falling structures, shifting debris. In fact, the 3 firefighters who were rescued today were rescued because they were trapped inside the shifting debris, the partially collapsing buildings, even today. The second piece of videotape that I want to show you is really chilling, really haunting. I alluded to it earlier, and that is that some of these rescue workers are now writing on their arms, writing on their legs, their names, their social security numbers, because they know just how dangerous the work they're doing inside there is, and that they too could become the latest victims of these terrorist attacks. Tom, that's the situation here in Lower Manhattan.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's David Bloom. In fact, some of those firemen who were rescued today were rescuers who then had to be rescued because they got caught in the collapse of a building. For families of those still missing in the World Trade Center rubble, a terrible reality is slowly sinking in, a reality that is so wrong and so hard to accept. Their loved ones may, in fact, never come home, but they can't give up hope. Here's Dateline's Edie Magnus.
Secretaries, restaurant workers, brokers, mothers, sons, loved ones who've not been heard from since the World Trade Center towers collapsed. So far, fewer than 100 bodies have been recovered.
We have 94 where we have bodies for identification. 46 of those 94 have actually been identified.
But more than 4,700 people have been reported missing. This man, who worked on the 97th floor of Tower 1, has 5-month-old twin girls at home.
I was ready to move on to buy a house. Give my sister everything that she wanted.
James Cartier worked in Tower 2 on the 105th floor.
This is all we got right now is pictures and memories. I have a picture here.
Michelle Enrique, 27, worked at Fiduciary Trust on the 92nd floor. Janine Gonzalez worked on the 102nd floor with Aon as a secretary. She was chatting online when the second plane struck. This Sunday would have been her 28th birthday.
She's an aggressive person. She would have called. She would have took somebody if they called my aunt, my mother, my sister.
Sean Lugano, 28, worked as a trader at KPW on the 89th floor. The second of 5 kids, this born and raised New Yorker played and coached rugby. David Meyer, 57, survived the 93 World Trade Center bombing, carrying a woman down 105 flights of stairs. Bond trader, father, and grandfather.
He's always been good. He's always helped anybody who asks him. He's always helped my family through hard times. Please.
The spouses of these women, 4 men who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 105th floor, husbands and fathers. Tom Burke, father of 4. Thomas Palazzo, 43, father of 3. George Morell, 47, father of 4. William Minardi, 46, father of 3.
Billy loves life. He can't keep still. He is constantly on the go. He's got more friends and he's able to make contact with all his friends. He's loyal to each and every single one.
Stephanie Fisher's husband Andrew, a software designer, was attending a conference on the 106th floor.
If he is at peace and it happened to him and he's gone, I hope the smoke got to him first before he felt any pain of anything falling.
Peter Gansey, chief of the New York Fire Department, served for 33 years. A father of 2, repeatedly decorated for bravery. Anthony Luperetto, 62, a maintenance worker, father of 4, grandfather of 6, married for 40 years.
He was a good father-in-law. He showed me how to do his tomato plants in the garden.
Scott Saber, 37, was an executive director at UBS Warburg.
He was my baby brother. I have hours and hours of stories of fighting with each other and then being best friends.
Swarna Chalasani, an analyst with Fiduciary Trust. She also volunteered for an organization that helps battered Asian women.
She is a most incredible person, you know, and we just want to find her because people like her make friends right away and they deserve to be healthy and happy.
Faces of the Missing, a haunting gallery of memories, love, and hope.
Now to the daunting diplomatic and political equation that Secretary of State Powell is working on under the direction of President George Bush. A key player in all of that is Pakistan, probably the Taliban government's closest ally. The Taliban government, of course, that controls Afghanistan, where it is widely believed that Osama bin Laden has now been harbored. There, the word is that the United States is putting on pressure on Pakistan to cooperate with a possible strike against Osama bin Laden and certainly to send a warning to the Taliban in Kabul. NBC's Ron Allen is in Pakistan's capital of Islamabad with the latest for us. Ron?
Tom, we get the sense that the United States has been applying enormous pressure to the Pakistani government during the past couple of days, going so far as handing the government here a long list of exactly what the U.S. wants Pakistan to do. At the top of that list, we understand that the United States has told Pakistan that they expect the government here to use its influence with the Taliban to bring about the arrest and then handover of Osama bin Laden. They've been that blunt about it. The United States also wants Pakistan to close off its border with Afghanistan. They want Pakistan to make its airspace available. And this morning here, Friday morning, we are hearing reports that In fact, the airport here in the capital, Islamabad, has been closed, and a number of flights have been canceled this morning that were heading in this direction. We're not sure exactly why the decision was made or what it could mean. But there seems to be a sense here that there's a lot of tension building. Pakistan has a very stark choice to make. It's a nation that has not had a very good relationship with the United States, especially in recent years since it began nuclear testing, which the United States strongly opposes. It is under sanctions already. However, Pakistan has a very close cultural, political, and religious relationship with Afghanistan. In fact, the Taliban movement in Afghanistan has deep roots in this country. So the choice that the leaders of Pakistan have to make is a very stark one, to go along entirely with what the United States is demanding that it do, or perhaps face a backlash at home here from militant groups and others who oppose Pakistan being too close to the West. Across the border in Afghanistan, we're hearing reports of people fleeing the capital, Kabul. We're hearing of reports of foreign aid workers, diplomats fleeing the country as well. We understand that there are now very few foreigners in Afghanistan. There are unsubstantiated reports of residents of the capital going so far as even digging trenches, worried about an imminent possible attack. Tom?
Ron Allen, what about in the streets of Islamabad and throughout Pakistan? What has been the reaction to this terrorist attack on the United States?
Mixed feelings. A lot of people are expressing concern, disbelief that one man, Osama bin Laden, could be behind this. A lot of concern, though, that Pakistan could be blamed, that could get caught up in the fallout if, in fact, Afghanistan is blamed. Tom?
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Ron Allen tonight in Islamabad in Pakistan. Keep your eye on that country. It is going to be a critical component in whatever happens. Joining us now from the White House is NBC's Campbell Brown. Campbell, tomorrow is a National Day of Remembrance. What else is on the president's schedule tomorrow?
Well, Tom, he will be going to church services in the morning here in Washington, and then he will be traveling to New York tomorrow afternoon to see firsthand the damage and devastation there, to meet with many of the families and recovery workers. He announced that today he was having a conference call with Mayor Rudy Giuliani and New York's Governor George Pataki. I do want to give you a little bit of information we learned this evening. This is from a senior administration official who confirms much of what we Allen saying tonight, and this illuminates a lot of what has been coming out of these national security meetings that the president has been having throughout the day, saying that they are in fact putting a lot of pressure on Pakistan and being very specific with them in terms of what kind of help they need with regard to intelligence and with military operations. This official saying that they know Pakistan is eager to avoid isolation, wants to be more of a part of the world community, and that they are essentially telling them you cannot be on both sides of this struggle. It is time for you as a country to step up. Their message to any known country who is known to have harbored terrorists in the past is essentially they are going to view these countries with a great deal of suspicion, that they will have to prove their innocence. This official did make one point with regard to Osama bin Laden, that yes, of course, he is the main suspect, but at the same time, they cannot rule out the possibility that other groups may have been involved, only because it may, if they do, close off avenues that investigators should be exploring or allow evidence to go cold because they haven't been considering that. And one final point this official making tonight, Tom, is that one thing you'll see the president doing over the next several days is trying to send the message to the American people that this is not going to be a quick operation. This is not something they are going to take care of in a matter of weeks. This official talked about multiple years before they are able to resolve this. Tom?
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Campbell Brown at the White House tonight. Figuring out exactly who did this and how may end up being the easy part, how to keep it from happening again. The U.S. intelligence community faces a much tougher task, looking deep inside to figure out what went wrong this time. Here's Dateline's Victoria Corderi.
Behind the now devastatingly familiar images loom some disturbing questions that will not go away. How could this happen here? The United States, the intelligence powerhouse, blindsided by a precision attack from 4 simultaneously hijacked airliners. And perhaps more frightening still, could it happen again?
It's a wake-up call for our country, basically.
Our lives have changed. I think it's as close to war as I ever want to be.
The intelligence community is facing some tough questions about how it may have allowed followers of a notorious terrorist, Osama bin Laden, allegedly to breach security at 3 airports and to attack 2 cities.
It is a new page in American history, and we've got to recognize that and be able to respond to it.
Senator Bob Graham is the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Along the way, weren't there big shreds or small shreds of evidence that could have been pieced together? And wasn't that a monumental failure?
Before we reach that conclusion, let's complete the analysis of what in fact occurred on Tuesday.
Can there be any other conclusion?
There certainly are significant gaps in our current intelligence capability that have not been filled. Spies, staying up with technology, being able to analyze what we collect. What role each of those may have played in this particular incident occurring, we don't know yet. We will know soon.
Senator Bob Graham readily admits the U.S. has gone soft when it comes to rooting out terrorism, especially since the Soviet Union is no longer the enemy.
Frankly, we let our intelligence capabilities slip. What we found out now is that we replaced the bear with 100 rattlesnakes, and what we need to have even more diverse and more sophisticated intelligence in order to understand those rattlesnakes.
And this is the most tragic, but certainly not the first time Americans have witnessed terrorism against their own. The first World Trade Center bombing and the USS Cole terrorist attack evidenced our vulnerability long before Tuesday's bombing.
So where has intelligence in the United States failed? Many point to the aftermath of the Cold War. Technology changed and the enemy changed, and the U.S. simply failed to keep up.
Cold War technology revolved around satellites and reconnaissance and communications interceptions. But experts say that has not helped in a world where terrorist cells communicate on the internet. And there's another aspect to intelligence no one really wanted to talk about until now: spies. Once they came in from the cold, they sort of disappeared. It's called human intelligence, and some experts say it is lacking.
This is not something you just push a button and get instant human intelligence. This is something we need to be working toward for decades, generations.
Frank Salufo is a terrorism expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
You don't just knock on, for example, Osama bin Laden's cave and say, here, I want to join.
That's why Senator Graham wanted to put more money into recruiting and training people.
We not only want the spies to be able to get inside the cell, but we want them to understand how the computer that the cell uses to communicate with operates and how we can put a tap on that computer so that we can listen to what they are communicating.
And that means working closely with those close to the enemy.
If we're going to get the kind of information that we need, which will help us avoid another Tuesday, we're going to have to recruit people who have got some dirt under their armpits.
So terrorists on the payroll?
They will be terrorists who will be people that we have reason to believe are now prepared to work on our side of the street.
Terrorism expert Salufo agrees.
Terrorists don't frequent the cocktail circuit. Very few terrorists, and obviously none, are Boy Scouts. We need to be willing to recruit people within the decision-making chain of these organizations with blood on their hand to prevent the loss of American blood and other innocent blood in the future.
And that's not the only compromise Americans are being asked to make. Senator Graham says the ban on assassinations effectively has been lifted, and that signals a big change in Washington. The new attitude towards intelligence seems to be whatever it takes.
And we should make sure that these agencies responsible for protecting American citizens against terror are not forced to fight this critical battle with one arm tied behind them.
Former President George Bush, also the former head of the CIA, came out to plead support for the Bureau. And Senator Graham, who is pushing for a 5-year, $6 billion intelligence budget, no longer expects the resistance he anticipated from Congress.
This is a turning of the page in American history. We are moving from the stage of innocence to the stage of appreciation of vulnerability. And we need to use this new chapter of American history to try to see that we do not become another Northern Ireland or Israel where our children grow up in constant terror and fear.
Can this happen again? And can the intelligence community protect us?
Can the American intelligence community give us an insurance policy of absolute protection? No. Can it give the American people the assurance that they are the most secure people in the world? Yes.
Dateline's Vicki Corderi tonight, and joining me now from the Pentagon with some late developments is NBC's Jim McNamara down there.
Well, Tom, you know, about 24 hours ago, you and I talked, and we marveled at the fact that they finally got the fires out here at the Pentagon. But here you're seeing a live picture from our camera just across the street from devastated part of the Pentagon, and the fires have erupted once more. The problem has been, for the last couple of days, hot spots and pools of jet fuel that were still located in part of the debris. But this appears to be on one of the collapse sections, where the floors pancaked on each other. You can tell that by the fact that it's at an angle there. Yes, as the camera pulls back, you can see clearly that's right in the middle of that area that was thought to have been safe. Construction workers were trying to shore it up so that recovery teams could go in and try to recover those remains that were still buried beneath the rubble, and also so that National Transportation Safety Board investigators could finally get into that area to search for the black boxes on that American Airlines Flight 77 that's building. You know, construction workers, rescue or recovery teams were working in that area. I don't know if they were using any kind of torches, acetylene torches or anything of the like to burn through some of the debris, but it's quite possible given the location of that fire, because that's not where the most stubborn located earlier. The fire had been traveling through the wood structures that comprised much of the roof of this facility, which is 60 years old.
All right, Jim, what's the latest, by the way, on the count of the people who are still missing in there, and how many bodies, if any, have been recovered?
Well, we're told that approximately 70 bodies have been recovered in the Pentagon. 26 people are now believed to have been on 64 airlines flight, including the passengers and the terrorists. So for a total of 190 dead. That's the latest and firmest estimate on all of the remains will be removed from here and taken to Dover, Delaware, where the forensic labs will try much of the remains that have been recovered here. But again, only about 70, so 120 remain buried beneath the rubble.
All right, that's got to be painful for every American to look at that, but especially painful for General Norman, who's such distinction and abroad in the uniform of the United States Army. And he talks strategically, however, General, about how the United States does conduct a military operation, most likely in an area of the world. Pakistan obviously is going to be a key player. They launched Operation Desert Storm. Saudi Arabia military base, that is not going to be available this time. Where does the U.S. go?
Well, I wouldn't say just yet that it may not be available. You know, air-to-air refueling, we can actually launch from places quite distant and still arrive over our targets if we're using our aircraft. So, although it would be nice to have Pakistan, you know, where we were allowed to officially launch our strikes from there if we do so, it's not absolutely necessary.
Do you think that... well, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's going to be interesting to see